Hi there, Ken here, and welcome to the library. Today we are not reading the Shalon Alliance. We are going to be reading Alpha Test by David Pendleton, a author who passed away back in 2018. He was talked into writing the book by a friend and managed to get it all written and published, and while working on the second book, unfortunately passed. The torch was then passed on to his wife, who was going to finish writing the second book and publish it, but unfortunately, little is known about what happened. That was before COVID, and hopefully she's okay. But I figured I'd like to pay my respects to Mr. Pendleton by reading his story on stream today. We're not going to get through the entire thing. If you can read the bottom of that little panel there, it's 6,666 pages. So, we will do our best. We will read what we can and carry on next week or whenever I stream next. I don't know. Anywho, let's get into the story. Pull up my panels real quick. You will also note that I am not in my usual outfit. I decided to dress a little more snazzy this time around. Also, the cover of this book really amuses me because it looks absolutely nothing like the main character, which you will be finding out soon enough. So, The Tales of Angremoria, Alpha Test, by David R. Pendleton. As you can see, there are 15 chapters, and then an about the author. Chapter 1, The Call. Do you want to be the first to experience a new world 10 times larger than Earth? Do you want to be the first to tame the landscape, build your own city, and grow your power? Apply now for the most exciting new virtual reality game ever. Unlike other games, Angremoria looks real, feels real, and lets you taste, smell, touch, and interact with the world around you. VR Medicom invites you to apply for your chance to join an elite few to alpha testers. If you're selected, you'll be given a free VR cocoon for use during the tests, automatically qualifying for inclusion in the beta and open beta tests, and be granted special in-game items when Angremoria VR is released to the general public. To apply, go to our Angremoria VR website and fill out the online application. Devin could barely contain his excitement when he read the email. He would love to participate in alpha testing and decided immediately to fill out the application. First, he had to finish the project he was completing for work, but once that was done, he would dive headfirst into research on Angremoria, despite the odd name. What the heck was an Angremoria, anyway? On a whim, he did a quick web search on Angremoria and got a message asking if he meant Angry Mario. He didn't, but thought that might be a pretty good game too. The Mario franchise was one of the oldest in computer gaming history, and after the pathetic latest release, he was pretty sure Mario was furious. Turning back to the screen in his office, Devin kept working for the next few hours. Finally, he was far enough along to call it a day. As he reversed his wheelchair to head to the kitchen for supper, an incoming chat request popped up on his screen. Turning back to the screen, he accepted the request from his boss. Jill popped up on his center monitor, and as usual, wore a condescending smile he was sure she thought was friendly. Devin here. Devin, I was just looking over the schematics you were working on. Are they finished? If this had been his project lead or a coworker, Devin might have suspected a trap. But since it was Jill, he was pretty sure she was sincere. Business school might be great for becoming the manager of a team of engineers, but it wasn't so great for learning to read engineering diagrams. He did have to give her credit, though. She could fake understanding pretty well most of the time. No, they aren't. I got them to a point where I need to take a break and then review them again. As you can see, I haven't put in the power couplers yet, and the strain gauge feedback circuits are still routed through a joint which would probably cause a failure. With the deadline still a week away, I'm confident that I'll have it done with plenty of time for peer review. It should be ready in a day or 3. Can you get them done earlier? She asked, slightly tilting her head. Why? I thought we had a week before presentation. Review won't take more than a day or 2. I'm on schedule to be done early. The nice thing about telecommuting was you could work whenever as long as you met deadlines. The bad thing about telecommuting was that deadlines were pushed up constantly because bosses figured you could be working all the time. That's true, but upper management is really excited about this project and would love to look at the designs early. Are you authorizing overtime? You're salaried. When it came time for benefits, I was told I was an independent contractor. Are you offering a bonus? No. 3 days then. I'm already putting in lots of extra time. You could always put one of the other roboticists on it. He knew that she really couldn't. There were 3 really good roboticists that worked in his section and 1 brilliant one. She was talking to the brilliant one, and he knew the other 2, knew that 2 of the 3 good ones were on vacation. One was skiing in Colorado, and one was hiking somewhere. Neither activity was one he could participate in because of the rare disease that confined him to a wheelchair and often forced him to use a ventilator. You know I can't do that, and even if I could, I wouldn't. This is your baby. Baby? This is a welding robot for the Navy. I'm not sure what my kids will look like, but it better not be like this thing. The snide came back actually hit him in the gut. He wouldn't ever have babies. His robots probably were the closest thing he would come to offspring. What girl wanted to marry a wheelchair-bound weakling, even if he had a genius IQ? Even if he wanted to date, it was dangerous for him to leave the filtered air and serenity of his home. Well, this welding robot is potentially a cash cow. So, bonus? If you get it done early, I'll let Jones know and I'm sure he'll reward you. Glancing over his shoulder, Devin considered his wall of rewards. A few glass plaques, the rotator gear from his first robot design, and a wall full of paper praise. Their only value was sentimental, and he wasn't sentimental. At least he could bash his own brains out or cut his wrists with the glass plaques if he decided to end it all. Other than that, the paper certificates probably wouldn't make a good bonfire. Sorry, Jill, I've got some things to get done in my personal life. I'll try to get them done a bit early, though. So, can I tell them it will be done when? 3 days. That I can guarantee, but early is just wishful thinking right now. Devin, this could be a career changer. That's what you said about the vacuum bot, the auto washer, and the intelligent kitchen, which, by the way, still can't make a decent waffle. Now, if you put me on the design team for a new sex bot, I'd probably happily work overtime. Jill glared at him, but he didn't care. If you let them, the bosses would have you work 24/7 and then put a gold watch in your coffin. She said, sometimes you can be so difficult. Why can't you be more of a team player? Devin backed up until he knew she could see his frail body in the wheelchair. All I have are my brains and my hobbies. I rent my brains out to you, but I need time for my hobbies, or I think I would lose my mind. Now, it's time for me to spend some time with my hobbies. If you want me to put in extra time, you need to put in some extra incentive. I don't climb ladders, not even corporate ones. Please try to get it done as early as possible. Jill was practically pleading, and it made more of an impression than her earlier attempts at manipulation or control. Devin had worked with her for a few years and knew this was just another card in her deck. But he also knew that it could be better to play along than make a stand for no gain and less reason. You know I will, but I still need a break. I'll try to get back with you later today and probably early tomorrow. With that, he closed the connection and set his status to away. He opened the interface for his own intelligent kitchen and ordered up eggs and toast. He was being honest when he told Jill that the kitchen couldn't make a good waffle, but it did make wonderful eggs and toast. He also ordered a strong black coffee, the nectar of the gods that so many ruined with cream and sugar. Strong, black, and hot, but not hot enough to burn his tongue when he took a gulp rather than a sip. Another benefit of the intelligent kitchen was its ability to make a perfect cup of coffee. He reread the email while he waited for his meal to be prepared. He wasn't even sure which meal of the day it was, so he checked the time and saw that he was having an early dinner. He didn't fit into the normal 24-hour schedule because he took several short naps throughout the day and only slept 4 to 6 hours a day. He normally worked from mid-morning to mid-afternoon and again later at night from around 10 p.m. into the wee hours of the morning. In between was game time. VR RPGs allowed him to have the body that nature had denied him. He could be a tough warrior or a skilled mage. Normally, he liked playing healers and always pursued the trade skills allowed in-game. Creating and selling items was one of the best ways to make money in-game, and money equaled power and ease. He didn't always play healers, but if he was making a main in games, it was always a healer or off-healer. He was sure a psychologist would have a field day with that and relate it to his desire to heal his own real-world condition. Who knew? They might even be right. It was also one of the easiest ways to join a team or raid, and only idiots verbally assaulted the team healer. Of course, VR RPGs did have plenty of idiots, so there were times he had the satisfaction of watching someone who was a mouthy legend in their own mind die when he was just a little too incompetent to heal them or even try to. As long as he kept the tank alive, no one ever complained long. And if the upstart didn't learn, it was almost fun giving the party the choice of kicking their healer or the mouthy DPS off the team. He hadn't lost that argument yet. His favorite memory was of a guild team he had joined years earlier. Since he wasn't part of the guild, he figured he was in a weak spot if anything went wrong. He kept the party from wiping from 2 really bad pulls the tank made with the help of one idiotic huntard who died both times. It wasn't personal, but he was using every trick just to keep the tank alive, and the hunter was constantly pulling aggro off the tank. After the first death, there was an argument, and he told the hunter to back it off and let the tank pull and do his job. The reply was denigrating to both the tank and him. The second time the hunter died, he was ready to get kicked out of the party. Devon almost left without offering the ultimatum, but wanted to see what would happen. So he said, "Listen, I can't go through an instance where one DPS keeps making trash fights into last stands. It's him or me." Hotshot, the hunter, shot back, "Come on, guys! Kick this worthless healer. He's let me die twice, and half my armor is yellow now. My repair bill is going to be massive." "He does have a point, Hotshot. You've been pulling instead of letting me taunt a couple at a time," defended the tank, named Bulwark Dude. Devon was playing under his favorite name, Rotten Dog. Hotshot was apoplectic. "Just because you can't keep aggro doesn't make it my fault. Anyway, no one died but me." His memories were a condensed version of the verbal diarrhea that had spewed from Hotshot's tirade. His voice had even cracked a couple of times, which just seemed to set him off even more. Interrupting Hotshot when he took a rare breath, Devon retorted testily, "You keep pulling aggro off the tank while neither of the other DPS does. Of course you die. Your health drops like a rock, and it's a choice of just you or the whole team. I can heal health, but I can't cure stupid. Him or me, guys. He's a guildie, so no hard feelings if you choose to kick me. Just don't expect me to team again." "Hotshot has been kicked from the team," popped up on Devon's HUD. Oh, how I wished I could have listened to that guild chat. The stream of profanities and curses that flowed over party chat before he was mercifully kicked from that showed that Hotshot had a lot of training in trash-talking and team-destroying talents. Devon's mind continued to replay his thoughts from that day. Still, DPS are a dime a dozen, and we had refilled the team in seconds and flew through the dungeon easily after that. Never heard from Hotshot again, but I seriously doubt he had learned his lesson. I must admit that I did team with Bulwark Dude a number of times, and he was actually a pretty decent tank, working hard at learning to be a really good one. Devon returned to reality when the ready light and buzzer from the intelligent kitchen went off. He motored over to the dispenser, took his dinner, and after a quick slug of black go juice, left the kitchen and went into his study. Oh, my bad. It's not 6,666 pages. It's only 257. Its location, 156 of 6,666. So, continuing on. When he first started working, Devon tried to use the same computer for both work and play, but found it was far too easy to dump work and start to play. So now he had an office with a very nice computer in it that was able to run all of the design and compiler software he needed, as well as a separate game room, or study, as he referred to it, to hold his pride and joy. His decked-out VR gaming computer with full VR headset and bodysuit. He had paid a lot extra for a suit that could be strapped on rather than one that had to be put on like clothing. Most VR suits look like the all-in-one long john underwear or toddler pajamas. His looked more like a drape with straps, gloves, and booties. He earned a pretty good living from his work and really didn't have much to spend it on. The house was paid for, and many of the accommodations for his condition were either provided by insurance or the government, or received at significantly reduced cost. He never ate out, although he did order takeout. He didn't go to movies, date, drink, another suicidal activity for him, or own a car. If it weren't for online ordering, he'd have to hire a butler. But with online ordering, the postal service and package delivery companies were his personal Jeeves. The delivery men knew him so well, they brought the packages in and sometimes helped him put groceries and items away. It didn't hurt that tipping was one of his main added expenses. Gliding up to his computer, he didn't put on the VR suit since he wouldn't need it to apply to be included in the alpha testing for Angry Mario Online. He quickly found the website and was greeted with stunning 3D screenshots of a very detailed VR world. He started reading the sales pitches. The promises made for VR games were always best before the testing even started. Game planning was just as much a fantasy as the game itself, and no game ever lived up to the pre-release hype. Still, that didn't mean that the designers were lying. They were just sharing their vision rather than the likely reality of the final product. In bold, flaming chrome text, the website announced, "Angra Moria is not just VR, or IVR." He continued to read, but his heart sank a little as he realized that IVR meant that it required special hardware that looked a lot like a suspended animation module. The announcement admitted that it could be played in standard VR, so his spirits rose a bit. Most games required a huge outlay of cash for proprietary hardware were doomed to failure. However, all alpha testers would be loaned, although not given, a full IVR pod for their use during alpha, beta, and open beta testing. If they decided to keep the IVR pod afterward, they could pay a reduced fee, which wasn't shown. Even figuring out that the pod was a loan required reading the fine print at the bottom. And clearly, inclusion into the alpha testing was not guaranteed. He had to complete a mini contest based on a form and a short write-up describing why they should choose the applicant. It wasn't unusual for companies to hold application contests for new alpha releases. Devon clicked through the hype until he came to the form. Links ran up and down along the left and right sides of the screen with information to help decide what to put in the boxes. What race would you play? Link to race chart. Why? What primary skill tree would you choose? Link to skill trees. Why? What secondary skill tree would you choose? Same link to primary skill tree. Why? What skills would you focus on? Link to a character improvement guide. What special talents do you have that qualify you to be a tester? After reviewing the race and skills, Devin started filling out the form. Race? Gnome. Why? Because he planned on being a mercantile primary with healing secondary. That meant his top choices were human, high elf, goblin, and gnome. Sure, dwarves got a boost to blacksmithing, but they were obviously pushed to be fighters. Humans were boring, and high elves would be a hugely popular race filled with teen-tards who wanted to look good as much as they wanted to be badasses. He looked long and hard at goblins, since life would be easier if he went mercantile DPS rather than mercantile healer, and goblins did get a boost to engineering, which tugged at his heartstrings. But then he looked at gnomes again. Short, cute, cuddly gnomes, with their +5 to mercantile. He was pretty sure it might be a typo, but if it wasn't, that meant +5 to the whole skill tree. It was almost like they were daring people to be a gnome. There would probably be a lot of gnome healers and mages, but with the extra bonuses high elves got, there would still be a lot more high elves than gnomes. So race equals gnome. Y equals best fit for his primary and secondary skill trees. Primary skill tree, mercantile. Why? Money is power, especially early in the game, and the hype did say that the best armor would be manufactured. Of course, companies would always promise that, but boss drops were always better eventually. However, potions, enchantments, even food, and the raw materials were normally gold mills, especially if there was a world marketplace, as the advertisements also promised. He formulated his answers for the application evaluators, though. Most testers will be exploring the map and the combat skills. Good trade skills will add interest, depth, and character to a game and should be tested just as thoroughly. Secondary skill tree, healing. Why? You had to have a way to level, and healers normally could even power level. He was happy to see that healers had some damage capabilities as well, but knew that if he was planning to team, he would first need to focus on heal and special. Resurrect looked like another potential moneymaker. He'd always been gold greedy in games, even though he often gave a lot of it away. Again, though, he answered for his audience. Why? With the time and focus that trade skills require, a secondary ability that is widely accepted for teams and dungeons will help level the character and allow for greater exploration of both skill trees. Which skills would you focus on? The documentation said applicants could choose 2 sub-skills for their primary and 1 for their secondary skill trees. With all skill trees having 3 sub-skills except mercantile, which had 5, it would be harder to truly be a mercantile god than the others. He considered swapping and making heal his primary, but he decided to write it out with his first choices. After all, it was only alpha testing, and he could switch during beta and open beta, and then decide what he really wanted to do if he continued to play the game after release. For testing purposes, mercantile would be the least utilized by most applicants, so he hoped it would help springboard him into the chosen few. Looking over the sub-skills, he immediately chose engineer as one of them. The second choice was really hard. Blacksmithing would certainly help his engineering. Enchanting was always a money generator, as well as a way to keep your own character better equipped without being the source of someone else's gold. Alchemist meant potions which normally didn't make as much per unit, but sold lots of units and often were viable for a much longer period of time. That wasn't as important during alpha testing since everything got reset for each stage of testing, but still it was a strong consideration. Trade seemed to be the weakest of the three for making quick cash, which is why he chose it. What better time to test its potential than during alpha testing, when a bad choice would have the least effect. For a secondary tree, there was only one choice: light. In his experience, dark normally did better damage and poorer healing for parties, so if he was going to level by dungeon crawling with pickup groups, pugs, then he needed to be a viable healer. Sure, there were going to be some dark priests who specialized in healing, but unless the subskill proved very useful, they would probably regret choosing it over light. However, dark did look like it might be a minion tree, allowing the priest to summon undead or demons to aid him. As cool as that sounded, he stood by his choice for light. He passed the test and didn't join the dark side, at least not during alpha testing. Darth Vader could wait for beta. Which skills would he focus on? Engineering and trades for his primary, since engineering fit well with his real-world experience, and trades were a complete unknown that he felt few testers would attempt to level. For his secondary tree, he would focus on light since it seemed to offer the most value to player teams, which was how he mainly planned to level. The skill and attribute leveling was different than most games he had played. Rather than choosing the direct path of leveling or being given standard boosts to skills or attributes, the new system granted upgrade points that could be used anywhere. His choices of skill trees and race affected how expensive it was to raise attributes and skills, and also limited the speed they could be raised, but they could all be raised if desired. He could still invest heavily in magic skills, but without making it a preferred skill tree, all of the skills would be yellow to dark red. Dark green was the cheapest, then light green, yellow, and orange. Dark red was the most expensive. Green allowed 6 skill increases per level, yellow allowed 5, and red allowed 4. So all mercantile skills would be light green to yellow, with chosen skills dark green to light green. Heal would be close to the same, although the opposite of his chosen skill, dark, did show some orange in a few higher skills, and had almost no light green. The documentation also mentioned that the skill trees expanded as levels increased, with sub-skills spawning new sub-skills with further advancement, training, and discovery. What special talents do you have that qualify you to be a tester? He treated this question as a job application and wrote an introductory paragraph before adding some human elements that he hoped would help sway the judges. While he tried not to have a victim mentality because of his disability, he wasn't below using it at times to get things he really wanted, like getting to alpha test new IVR RPG. What special talents do I have? Devin answered, I am a trained robotics design engineer with specializations in both general kinematics and electrical schematics. My study and training, as well as my work history, have provided me with the ability to analyze and categorize large and disparate data and develop strategies for exploiting uncommon relationships and determining issues before they become problems. I have also been an avid gamer for years and have been a successful beta tester on many games. This would be my first chance to be part of an alpha test team. Finally, I would point out that in the real world I am physically challenged, which has increased my mental fortitude but also given me a unique perspective and appreciation of the physical rewards that VR RPG provides. After submitting the form, he couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for the company to make their decision. He was mildly surprised to realize how important this chance had become for him. Sure, he had the normal feeling of excitement when anticipating a new game, but somehow the chance to influence the course of the game from the earliest interaction between the development team and the player base increased that excitement a lot. Too keyed up to sleep, he slipped on his VR suit and gear to play his current favorite VR RPG, but he couldn't stop planning how he would level and test his new character should he be chosen. Alright, I am going to take a quick break. We've been reading for half an hour already, and we are 5% in. I just want to check a few things real quick. Alright. Alright, nothing new there. Nothing new there. Alright, down says that. And just for gits and shiggles, why should I worry? Why should I care? Alright. Chapter 2, The Challenge. As the weeks went by, Devin put the contest out of his conscious focus. Every so often he saw an advertisement or social media blurb on the alpha testing. But life went on and he had projects to complete. He did receive a nice glass statuette for a marine welding robot as a reward for his design. The project was passed to a production team and he faded back to become a technical advisor and started work on his next project, an automated honey collector. Although it sounded mundane, the challenge of collecting honey without damaging the hive was proving far more difficult than he had initially thought it would be. Automating a robot to consider the welfare of the hive while maximizing the production of the honey required him to learn as much as possible about bees and apiculture. The company wanted to send him to an actual bee farm so he could experience it firsthand. That suggestion was ruthlessly trampled beneath the wheels of his best-used indoors wheelchair. He didn't buy for 1 second how much fun and informative it would be. So his study was from books and discussions with professional beekeepers. At one point, he realized he had learned enough that a trip to a bee farm might be helpful, but there was no way it was going to happen. Instead, he watched videos and attended online lectures to get a handle on the complex issues surrounding successful beekeeping. While watching yet another video of a hive from spring growth to winter hibernation, he noticed a prompt on his computer. Normally, he would have ignored it because responding to every communication request would have meant never completing anything. But his subconscious noticed something was wrong. This was a personal request being transmitted to his work computer. He never mixed the two, so the anomaly was striking. Pausing the hive video at late summer, he opened the communication. It was sent to his company email as a CC, but was sent to his private email directly. His pulse quickened as he realized it was from Vital Realities, the parent company and developer of Angry. Fear, hope, and anticipation played a three-way game of air hockey with his heart as he opened the email and scanned its contents. The first part was another sales pitch that didn't make it clear if they were trying to keep him excited before they rejected him or encouraging him when he found he was accepted. Finally, at the far bottom, a section began with, "Congratulations, you have been chosen." It took a full 5 minutes for him to calm down enough to finish the message. "You're invited to join the alpha testing team for Angry as long as you can fulfill the criteria and obligations required of a tester." The rest of the document was filled with legalese, but it boiled down to he had to be who he claimed to be, check, and he had to be over 21, check, and thank God there wouldn't be any young immature fanboys. But there would still be the even more dreaded older immature fanboys. Truthfully, while many players complained about teenagers or even preteens, his experience was that ages 18 to 25 were the middle of the bell curve, where a higher percentage of self-important a-holes resided. Every age group had their fair share, and sometimes everyone was a jerk. Maybe they had a bad day or weren't feeling well, so a single experience with a poor judge of overall character. But for some reason, around age 18, a higher number of players figured they were God's great gift to gaming and knew everything about everyone's job and felt free to give their highly critical opinions and advice to all around them. Being well above the age range made it easy for Devon to forget that there were times when he was that age that he had been exactly the kind of player he had grown to dislike teaming with. He still had nightmares of some of his more embarrassing, in retrospect, tirades against players who time revealed were much better than he thought. The guidelines also required him to have an adequate connection to the web, which basically meant there were a few people in the Antarctic who might not qualify. Beam data streams made high-speed networking available to almost every location on Earth, with electricity to power the receiver broadcaster. Latency issues that were so common with old satellite systems were overcome by geosynchronous mid-altitude hovering relays, which operated on solar power. Cheap to manufacture and deploy, the relays had removed the need for in-ground fiber and cable, and made wireless speeds rival and then exceed direct cable connections. There were still fiber technologies that could get higher transmission speeds, but they were rarely used commercially. He was also required to spend a minimum of 20 hours per week for at least 8 weeks in-game, playing and testing. He'd have to submit a written report at least every 40 hours of game time that followed a questionnaire format that allowed a lot of room for personal reflection and recommendations. He also had to allow anything he submitted to be used in advertising with no guarantee that it would be kept in context. Devon decided right then that he would retain copies of all his communication, just in case, even if releasing them would violate the NDA, non-disclosure agreement, that took up almost 2 screens of the email. The requirements went on for so long, he was pretty sure that if he ever did have kids, Vital Realities would have claim to them. But he wasn't deterred and digitally signed the agreement and returned it. His daily routines went on, but he had a hard time focusing. Queen bees dancing and fighting with other queen bees just didn't hold his interest. The design for the honeybot proceeded smoothly, but it was dragging out. Metal was so much easier to design than dealing with Mother Nature. His mind dreamed and yearned for the virtual fields of Angremoria rather than the real walls of his house, and for the thrill of his virtual job rather than his real one. He reread the email multiple times, but no date was given for when the testing would begin. Late in the afternoon, 4 weeks after returning his acceptance agreement, a video call request popped up on his screen. It was from a long-distance number he didn't recognize and had no name associated with it, so it wasn't in his contact list. When he accepted, a friendly, well-dressed older man with a Vital Realities logo behind him appeared on the screen. "Am I speaking to Devon Martin?" "Yes, you are. And whom am I speaking to?" "My name is Barton Chester, and I represent Vital Realities. We would like to discuss some arrangements and set up a time to deliver and install your IVR pod. Do you have a room we can put it in?" "Does it need to be in its own room, or can I put it in my study?" "Well, it's rather bulky, so if you have a spare room, it would probably work best. The pod takes up about 4 feet by 8 feet, so it doesn't absolutely require its own room." Panning the camera, Devon pointed it toward the dining room and a never-used table with 4 never-used chairs. "If the table and chairs are moved out, would this space work?" "That would be excellent. Could you have it cleared for when the workmen get there?" After refocusing the camera on himself, Devon motored back a little ways to give Mr. Chester a full view of his emaciated frame and an automated wheelchair. "It would be much easier if they were willing to clear it out when they got here. I apologize for the inconvenience, but I really cannot move it. The dining set was there when I bought the place, and it has never been utilized." "My apologies, Mr. Martin. I read that you were physically challenged, but you did not specify the nature of your disability." "Does this impact our agreement?" "Quite the contrary. We gave preference to people with trying circumstances because we feel you more than most will benefit from the new IVR system we've designed. I promise you we are already looking for ways to exploit it to give better virtual experiences to many who suffered debilitating conditions. We are investigating medical uses, virtual travel, and even virtual workspaces. This technology is quite extraordinary, I can assure you. Have you tried it? Mr. Chester's face took on a red tinge, which might indicate embarrassment or anger. I have, many times. Never in the land you're going to, but I have certainly tried out some of the other projects we are pursuing. Definitely embarrassment. Devin was almost certain that at least some of those projects dealt with the baser desires of humanity. Oh, he sure hoped they did. So how immersive is it really? Very. The redness deepened, but Barton couldn't hold back a smile. Trust me when I say you will be very pleased with how real it is. You will enjoy the full range of sensations, touch, taste, and smell, as well as sight and sound. You can feast on candy and sweets while losing weight. You can drink yourself silly, then leave the IVR environment and be fully sober with no ill effects. Basically what happens in Angry Moria stays in Angry Moria, Devin asked. Sorry, no, you signed away anonymity when you accepted our offer to participate in the alpha testing. But we do guarantee that only PG-13 material will be released. Any other interactions will be redacted from official releases. So your girlfriend may be suspicious, but won't have actual evidence should you decide to test the full capabilities of the IVR environment. I don't have a girlfriend or a boyfriend to worry about. So much the better. Confidentially speaking, I would encourage you to explore all aspects of the world we have striven to create for you. Please note that even this conversation is covered by your NDA, including any speculation you might have as to meaning or innuendo from any aspect of this discussion. So you're a lawyer, not just a representative, Devin replied with a smile. Indeed I am. This technology is a game changer, no pun intended, and its level of reality is absolutely amazing. If you remember your history about the hysteria that was caused by the AI sex robot threat to society, well, this could actually be the culmination of that threat made real. Mr. Barton referred to the fear that sex bots could spell the end of human-to-human relationships. The hype started in the 90s and then resurfaced in the 20-teens and reached a crescendo about a decade later. But there was just something in most people's psychic makeup that yearned for real connections with real people. Sure, the sex bot industry was still huge, but the human population had never seen a negative trend. This probably won't be any different than that. All hype aside, people need people. You're probably right, but consider that with robots, you're still you. With this technology, you can become whoever you want, and then change and try again as someone else or something else, male or female. Trust me, for Vital Realities, Angry Moria is just the pre-game launch of a much larger IVR universe where escape can take many forms. Devin was stunned to realize that if the reality did match the hype, it really could be a game changer. Pun intended. Even though that was for the future, he anticipated it almost as much as the alpha testing. When will the alpha testing begin? If you're available, we would like to deliver and set up your pod within the next week. Then you will go through some VR tutorials and training to introduce you to the basic game mechanics. The start date of the alpha testing will be announced to all the alpha testers at the same time. It will probably be in a month or so, but I am not privy to the actual information. You can deliver the pod anytime. I'm always home. Do you have any questions or concerns? A couple. This might sound minor, but with my condition I have to know. Will in-game activities cause real-world responses? Say if I run and get out of breath, will it affect my real-life body? Not at all. What I'm about to share is way beyond what I'm supposed to, but I am sympathetic to your concerns. Sorry. The new IBR system actually uploads a copy of your mind. Your actual body goes into kind of a suspended hibernation. The pod has nutrition and hydration capabilities for extended in-game activity, and in-game time can flow at different rates relative to the real world. Right now we have it set to 1 day in-game takes about 1 hour in real time. Since we are working with the speed of computers and the speed of thought, it could be sped up, but in testing this allows for monitoring and the use of in-game avatars who can be called if issues arise. We could also slow it down, but after considerable testing, 1 hour is the current maximum. We can adjust it, and you would be informed of if it's modified. This allows us to get far more testing done in far shorter time. So my 20 hours minimum of game time means about 20 days in-game each week? Devin asked. No, that is what it was set at for our testing. Since we expect more interaction between support avatars and testers, we are leaving it at a 1-to-1 for now. That may change later. So if the time dilation works later, Devin replied, and could not stop a broad grin from spreading across his face, it's almost like a life extension. This could almost be virtual immortality. The frown on Mr. Chester's face showed Devin he'd stumbled on a relationship that Vital Realities wasn't yet prepared to release for public scrutiny. Please do not repeat that again. I see you mention that you have an analytical mind and draw conclusions from disparate data. While I will not confirm or deny your conclusion, you're the first tester I have worked with that understood there are serious ramifications to this technology. Even in-game, you must refrain from speaking of this, since at times people who are not privileged to know such potential applications may be watching. I assume they would be under an NDA as well, said Devin. An NDA is a stick to punish, not a gag to prevent. If you break the NDA, we will make sure you suffer for it, but the cat will still be out of the bag, and it would be a very hard cat to confine again. Please don't violate the trust we are placing in you, Mr. Chester warned. I promise that I won't, as long as your company doesn't violate the trust that I am placing in you. Next, there seems to be relatively few skill trees to choose from. If the population is a reasonable size at all, most people will choose from relatively few viable paths. That is true in the alpha release. We have a number of other skill trees to release when closed beta, and probably refinements and new trees for open beta, then live. For alpha release, very basic main skill trees were selected, and even the sub-skill trees are not overly convoluted. This will change radically in beta, I assure you, Mr. Chester shared before continuing. Plus, we have left some skill trees open for development based on playstyles during alpha testing. The only skill tree that has been fleshed out with a lot of available variations is the mercantile tree, and that is because the developer and his team went to town, so to speak. Honestly, it was considered a side tree from the start, so the company did not rein them in like the other teams were with their trees. Moving on, what about the coffee? Devin inquired. Best you've ever tasted. Devin saw a wistful look come over Mr. Chester's face as he said it. Devin felt like he had received a new mission. Test the coffee. Pain? Yes, what would risk be without pain? Pain levels are still being adjusted, so just remember that the pain is only in-game. Once you leave the game, no material damage will have happened to your body. Right now, the goal is to make pain significantly less than it is in reality. Who would go into a sword fight, even in-game, if cuts hurt as much as they do in the real world? Dying, on the other hand, is supposed to... How did the developers put it? Oh yes, will suck worse than having a root canal with no Novocaine during a tax audit. The higher your level, the worse the pain gets. At level 1, it's merely a painful reminder. At level 100, it might cause nightmares, and at level 1000, you might never leave your fortress again. Level 1000? How many levels are there? Devin was shocked. Sorry, I was speaking metaphorically. I don't really know. I know it takes more experience to level the higher you get, like most games. I also know the developers have planned that the first 10 to 20 levels will be gained fairly quickly and with little risk. Aside from that, I really don't know the answer. Fortress? Again, I was being more poetic than knowledgeable. I know the game allows for city and castle building, so you could become your own king, queen, or evil overlord. I doubt you will reach that during the alpha testing, but with your choices, we have high hopes that you will build up a village or small city. I believe they are ensuring you spawn in a good spot to pursue that. Why me? Well, that brings up some interesting questions that we have for you. With the developers, you're a minor celebrity, especially with one named Greg O'Bannon. I'm a celebrity? Let me give you percentages in order of popularity and see if you can figure out why. Prime talent trees chosen. Fighter, 47%. Magic, 35%. Healing, 18%. Mercantile, 0%. These are rounded off. Secondary talent trees chosen. Fighter, 40%. Magic, 40%. Healing, 18%. Mercantile, 2%. Races chosen. High Elf, 25%. Human, 21%. Wood Elf, 16%. Dwarf, 11%. Giant, 8%. Troll, 7%. Orc, 6%. Goblin, 4%. Gnome, 2%. So almost no one took Mercantile as their primary except me, and there are very few gnomes, which surprises me because they make excellent casters, Devon said. Let me clarify just a little. Not almost no one took Mercantile. Only one took it. As for the gnomes, it was decided that the boost to intelligence and wisdom, but almost no supporting bonuses for caster probably caused that. So they modified gnomes a bit and gave you a +1 to charisma to help with the selling of things, and modified the bonuses so it's +10 to mercantile and +5 to healing light skills, and still -5 to two-handed weapons. And they changed charm from light green to dark green. That's a nice buff. Won't that upset people who didn't choose gnome? Oh, apparently we have an ad incoming. So we're going to take a brief break while that happens, and then we will continue on. So, be back. Alright, one moment while I fix something and mix it up. Oh, there we go. Add starts. Put it on chatting instead of starting. Save. I keep forgetting to do that. To be fair, I'm usually busy, so it doesn't really cross my mind. Also, I just realized that my vest for my outfit is see-through, so you can see the chair behind me. It's because of the color background choice I have in my PNG tuber program. So yeah, that's a thing. It's supposed to be a red vest, but yeah. Uh-oh. What is it? Poke by 100 Pokeball. Nope. Poke help. Alright, I'll be just a moment. Apparently I'm out of Pokeballs. There it is, Poke Shop. Oh, and my computer's starting to slow down. Lovely. There we go. Okay. Continuing on. Let's see here. The percentages are after the changes were made and offered, because initially only one other person chose Gnome as well. Honestly, you're the last alpha tester we have to talk to, and you can change your race if you want. Why would I? You just made Gnomes an even better choice for me. So I'm a celebrity because I chose Mercantile and Gnome? I will once again quote one of the developers. I really don't want you to take this personally, but he said you were probably going to be a midget death magnet and a total nobody. Was that Greg O'Bannon? Oh no! Greg O'Bannon was the chief developer of the entire Mercantile skill tree, and is one of the few who knows what opens up after the base skills. He was absolutely thrilled you took it as a primary. And how does he describe me? He thinks you're the smartest player in the game and the bravest. His analogy was the old mage in some game called D&D. I have never heard of it, so he clarified by telling me they were worthless at low levels, but practically gods at high levels. I think his parting words were, if he builds it, they will come. But I have no idea what he means. I do know he asked to be your personal support avatar, and the company has agreed. His in-game name is Hotshot. Chapter 3. The Setup. Hotshot? Could it be the same Hotshot? Even if it was, Devin doubted he would remember him, but it sure meant he wasn't going to use his normal healer handle. Normally all his healers were named Rotten Doc. Not extremely original, but he picked the name in college and it was his go-to choice. Now Devin had to come up with a new name. He had time, though, probably a month or so. Mr. Chester and Devin's conversation continued, but the most important things had already been covered. The earlier discussion of the future plans for the technology excited Devon more than the thrill of the upcoming alpha test. If his promises were true, he might be able to walk, run, and even have sex. He could drink booze if he decided to, pollute his virtual body, then snap out of it and have no side effects. With time dilation, he could take a 3-week vacation in one evening. He wasn't sure if 8 hours of virtual sleep would work to replace 8 hours of real sleep, but it might. After all, the real-world body was basically resting during the game. But on the other hand, sleep was as much mental as physical. The brain had to coordinate and compartmentalize, as Devon's old psych professor had explained. Did suspended minds dream of electric sheep? In the long run, there were exciting possibilities, especially for those whom fate had dealt a crooked hand. He felt hope spring up more than for all previous VR games he played. Those games helped because the immersion was very high, but he still felt his lungs straining, less sensation in his legs from the suit, and his arms were still heavy to raise. It had always affected his gameplay, and he knew he used the keyboard far more than most players. Now he might get to really know what it felt like to stand without help, to run, swim, even fall and skin his knee. At least that was the hope, but it had been a hope of many games before. But as he waited, every day stretched out like the night before Christmas when he was a boy. All the toys and gifts hidden, just waiting to be revealed. Just a few days later, the delivery van arrived, and the delivery men came in to remove the dining room furniture and put in the IVR pod. "What do you want us to do with the table and chairs?" the older one asked. "I have no need for them. If you can just take them with you, I'd appreciate it." "Take them with us? Take them where?" "You can have them for all I care." "I don't need a different dining room table." "I do," injected the younger one. "My wife and I would use them if you're serious." "There you go," said Devon. "Problem solved. Enjoy your new furniture, and soon I hope to enjoy mine." The IVR pod was moved into the center of the dining room, all boxed up with the Vital Reality logos all over, and the delivery men turned to leave. "Wait a second, aren't you going to set it up?" "Sorry, pal, I just deliver stuff. You'll have to set it up on your own," the older man responded gruffly, while the younger man just shrugged apologetically as they walked out the door. For a bit, Devon sat staring at the box. All he could do was leave it sit there. 3 days later came a knock at the door, and when he opened it up, 3 men with Vital Reality name tags stood outside. "Is this a good time for us to set up the pod?" one of them asked. "I guess so, but couldn't you have called first?" Virgil, according to his name tag, looked down at his tablet and scrolled down with a swipe of his finger. "Says here that we were to come by any time. Nothing about calling and no phone number on the form." "Loose lips sink ships." "What? Do you want us to come back later?" "We can, but it would be inconvenient. We aren't dispatched locally and just flew in last night. We're supposed to fly back out this evening." "No, now it's fine. I apologize. I just wasn't expecting company and it caught me off guard." "Say no more. So where's... Oh, there it is. Nice." His compatriots were also shaking their heads and smiling. Truthfully, his house was okay, but wasn't fancy enough to elicit that kind of response. It was a standard ranch house, prefab layout, with the main door leading into a very large living room, dining room kitchen. Just off the dining room was a back porch accessible through a slider door. His main bedroom was accessible from the living room, and a short hallway led to 2 more bedrooms and a guest room. He normally used the master bath off the master bedroom, even though his VR game room was in one of the spare rooms. The guest bath was not set up nearly as well for his accessibility. The last spare room was his junk room, so he wasn't sure why his very standard house would make the VR representative so happy. Virgil picked up on his perplexed look and pointed out the box holding the IVR pod. He said, "You have the pod in a really nice and easily accessible place. So many put it in their basement or even a shed or garage. It's pretty common that we've had to move them just to be able to set them up. This one is even close to water and an auto chef. You mean my intelligent kitchen? If that's what you want to call it. Most folk just call it an auto chef. Mine certainly isn't as fancy as this one. I bet yours could even make a decent waffle. You would lose that bet. But it makes a wonderful cup of coffee. Would you like some? If you want lunch, I can have it whip something up. Thanks, but we'll grab lunch after we finish. There's a great wings place just down the road. Sorry, you probably already know that. Devin knew there was a wings place, but he'd never tried it before because they wouldn't deliver. But Virgil didn't need to know that. But a cup of coffee would be great, with cream and heavy on the sugar. I like mine blonde and sweet, Virgil said. All three Philistines took their perfect coffee and sacrificed it on the altar of cream and sugar. Devin didn't say anything, but inside was dying as he ordered the cafe abominations and smiled as he handed them out after the intelligent kitchen served them up. He didn't even make one for himself, but planned to drink one after they left, so the taint of their hearsay had no chance of affecting his pure caffeinated potion of greatness. The process for setting up the IVR pod was quite involved. It needed power, but they also had to run lines to the sink to provide water, connect to the intelligent kitchen so they could supply raw nutrients, and hook up the waste tube, which they piped out the door directly into a sewer access pipe. Devin asked, "How long do they expect me to be in the pod?" Virgil answered, "This pod is actually repurposed. Originally, it was designed for deep space missions, so it was expected that people would be in them for years possibly. But even with food and water, it became obvious that these were insufficient for that length of time. You could stay in it safely and comfortably for up to 4 weeks, but after that your muscles would start to atrophy." He looked over, then realized what he had been saying, and became shamefully embarrassed. "Sorry, that was inconsiderate." "It's okay," Devin said. "I've lived with this most of my life. It hit when I was still a toddler, so I don't remember ever being able to get around without a wheelchair." "Not to sound harsh, but you'd probably make the perfect space traveler." "I wouldn't survive liftoff. But if they perfect that, who knows? How did Vital Realities get their hands on these, anyway?" "They were the contractors that were going to provide them to the government. They were working on the pods and the software to entertain the interstellar travelers. Then Congress up and kills the funding, deciding just to colonize the moon or Mars or something, and they no longer needed the pods, which meant they no longer needed the software. Rather than fold up and declare bankruptcy, the president rebranded the company and started working on Angramoria. At least that's how the company tells it when you come on board and go through the new employee training," Virgil shared. "How did they come up with the name? Do they explain that?" "Yes, they do, and I can even share it because I know you signed an NDA just like everyone else. The top of the company is kind of a three-man show. The president has the most control over the projects. The chief financial officer has the most say about the running of the business, and the SRB owns like 29% of the company and sticks his nose in everywhere. But he's terrified of both CFO and the president, who combined control 51%, so can team up and override him. The rest is publicly traded, but even if the SRB gets control of all of it, he winds up at 49%, and they can still override him. The CFO and president also have about 90% of the brain power between the three, but that's just my opinion." "SRB? Sorry, stupid rich bastard, Jeffrey something or other. We avoid him like the plague. The CFO is Robert Thompson, and the president is Barton Chester." "I met the president. We had a video chat." "Yes, he personally met every alpha tester, and I hear he was quite taken with you. If he hadn't liked you, he could have pulled the offer." "Really? Did he do that for anyone? Or did he do that with anyone?" "Only in 1 or 2 cases. There was at least one offer he wanted to rescind, but felt compelled not to." "Why?" "That person was physically challenged. Not you, though. He's also wheelchair bound. Barton didn't feel like he could take the chance away from him." "No offense, but you seem awfully well informed for a technician," Devin stated. I'm one of the best informed people at the company. My wife is Barton's secretary, so I get all of the inside info. I have an NDA which is tighter than most because of her job, but Barton personally told me to feel free to discuss things with you if I wanted to. Well, that was nice of him. Of course, he told me to feel free to discuss it with all of the others, but only one or two were as chatty as you. Most ignored us. Just to be clear, Barton is smart, driven, calculating, and even sentimental. But even when he is doing nice, you can be pretty sure that somewhere in the planning, the nice has a purpose. He let the other guy stay in. That was nice. Believe what you like. I respect the man a lot, but trust me, Barton has a goal. If you can help him get there, he will help you. If you get in his way, he will remove you. What is his goal? Don't know, but I do know that Angry Moria is just a stepping stone. A very important stepping stone, maybe, but still just a stepping stone. You still haven't told me how the name Angry Moria came about. Sorry, I get sidetracked pretty easily. SRB is an English snob, hence Anglo, which became Ang. CFO loves Rome, Roman history, and everything Italian, so Rom. And Barton is a huge J.R.R. Tolkien fan, and seems to feel the Mines of Moria fit the overall theme of the game, so, you know. Once grand, now desolate and dangerous, but full of hidden treasure. Hence, Ang plus Ro plus Moria. The Tolkien thing is a hint, by the way. He wanted hobbits, not gnomes. He's president, so why not just force hobbits? He's a fan of Tolkien, but he isn't about to pay royalties to use hobbits in his game. Enjoy being a gnome. I've heard they have more hidden gems of awesomeness than other races just because they're his favorite race. I must admit, SRB likes elves, and Mr. Thompson is partial to humans, so they also get a lot of advantages in starting locations, resources, and the like. Virgil didn't seem to want to stop talking, but the other men were getting impatient. The team finished setting up the IVR pod, then collected the trash and junk to take with them. Devon gingerly took the leftover desecrations they called coffee to the disposal bin and combined them to the pit where they belonged. He eagerly went back to the pod and analyzed it. The surface of the pod was shiny and black. Its sides were white with silver stripes. The design was extremely futuristic. Its dark cover shielded the inside, but when he opened it, he found a modified recliner covered in velvety gray fabric, with basic controls on the armrests. Atop a solid helmet was attached to pull down over the head. Another solid piece of equipment could be pulled up over the midsection. What was missing were gloves, boots, and any other sensors that might be attached to the body. Sitting in the middle of the recliner was a booklet with instructions on how to use the IVR pod. He picked up the booklet and perused it briefly. The first thing that caught his eye was that users were recommended to be completely nude while using the IVR pod. Excuse me. As he read further, he realized the equipment that pulled up over the midsection was used to collect and expel waste. Obviously, clothing would interfere with this process. There was no reason to test out the IVR pod immediately, so Devon's first task was to figure out how he'd get into it and out of it. For most people, it would be a simple matter of sitting on the edge of the IVR pod and lowering themselves in, but he didn't have the luxury of such ease of mobility. What he did have was a good idea of how to make a short ramp with a lift bar to easily transfer him from his wheelchair into the pod. He used a similar device to get into and out of bed every night. Wheeling into his bedroom, he evaluated the lift. It could easily be adapted to use with the IVR pod. Rather than remove the one in the bedroom, Devon ordered another one online to be delivered the next day. When the medical device was dropped off, the delivery man happily set it up next to the IVR pod. Devon had worked with the delivery man many times in the past, and they both knew that a hefty tip was in the offering. The delivery man didn't go away disappointed. Devon was ready to begin his alpha testing. Chapter 4. Training and Entry. As promised in the initial interview with Mr. Chester, or Barton, as even his employees seemed to refer to him, He was contacted a few days later to begin training in preparation for the alpha testing launch. The training wasn't done in the IVR pod, but instead was handled using his normal VR gear and his computer. Devin put on his gear with anticipation and eagerly clicked on the launch button for Angramoria IVR Online. There was a significant delay as the program launched, not unusual with new games. He was certain that textures, terrains, and features were being downloaded and installed before play could begin. Devin waited patiently, preparing himself to not just play a new game, but also to remind himself to critically analyze during the training, since he was a tester and not just a participant. A prompt finally appeared asking him to enter his login credentials. These had been supplied to him via email a few days ago, along with the link to allow the Angramoria prompt to appear on his desktop. In his excitement, he typed his password incorrectly, so he took a deep breath, counted to 10, and entered it correctly before hitting the continue button. The Vital Reality logo flashed on the screen, quickly replaced by the Angramoria logo before a cutscene launched an introduction to the new exciting world of Angramoria. The virtual camera soared over the vast plains, blue oceans, and icy mountains. It dove into a cave, opening and navigated convoluted pathways through subterranean catacombs and lava-filled gorges. Shooting upward, it followed an underground river and finally launched out over a cascading waterfall, only to drop toward a distant lake. Leveling out mere feet above the lake, it skimmed the water's surface before rising to barely miss the crenellated walls of a large city whose population included all of the races playable in the game, and many that weren't. As the cutscene was drawing to a close, his virtual view accelerated upward toward a raised platform, only to stop suddenly to leave him confronted with a choice of two characters, a male gnome or a female gnome. It appeared that while he could choose his sex, he was bound by his agreement to be a gnome. He knew a lot of players would choose characters of the opposite sex, but he always played characters of the same sex. His selection was almost automatic as he picked the male gnome. Delicious coffee. A disclaimer popped up immediately on his screen. It said, "Selections made during training are not binding when the alpha testing begins. However, it's highly recommended that you practice your gameplay as closely as possible to the characters that you will be using during the testing." Devin decided not to take any chances and proceeded to set his character as if he was doing it permanently. If he was going to be a short gnome, he was going to be the shortest possible, so he shrank the on-screen character down until it stood about 4.5 feet tall. The maximum height was 5 feet 2 inches, so it wasn't a huge difference. He also made his gnome slender with a wonderful, friendly silver mutton chop beard connecting seamlessly to a clown ring of white curly hair. Gnome women, eat your heart out. Put on some green and red, and he was ready for Santa's workshop. He made the facial features as friendly and open as he could, with deep blue eyes, lightly tanned skin, and delicate hands. He entered a name before he was allowed to proceed. He had already decided not to use his normal healer name. He chose to go with a play on the silent G from Gnome, and chose the name Nobody. It gave him a thrill to think how someone in PvP would report they'd been killed by nobody. A whole Who's on First routine popped into his mind. "So who killed you?" "Nobody." "Okay, but you were killed." "Yes." "And when you were killed, who killed you?" "Nobody." "But somebody killed you." "Yes." On and on, thank you for the material, Abbott and Costello. He could even reverse it. "So you won in PvP?" "Yes, I did." "Who did you beat?" "Nobody." "But you were fighting somebody." "Of course I was." "So who did you fight?" "Nobody." Sadly, according to his adoring developers, this scenario seemed more likely. The next screen requested his primary and secondary skill trees, but his choices were already made during the application and were immutable.
If someone had made choices just to get picked and figured they could change it at the last minute, they were going to be sorely disappointed. As it was, he was still excited by his choices and eager to explore the mercantile tree to see how much money he could make. After the choices were made, another cutscene launched. Hey, you can see my mouse. Sorry. And he was guided through a brief history of the Gnomish race, a race dedicated to building and manufacturing with strong ties to magic. Gnomes were the engineers and merchants of Angramoria. They took a backseat to dwarves when it came to blacksmithing. Goblins also had a penchant for engineering, but gnomes were portrayed as being more interested in explosions than constructions. He knew, though, that with their bonus, this wasn't at all a true requirement, but a racial stereotype. Gnomes also had strong ties to magic and made excellent mages and healers. Although there were many gnome warriors, they were shown to have difficulty competing with their beefier and more warlike neighbors. So craft, skill, guile, and raw intelligence were the gnomish tools of war. Another advantage was a near immunity to cold environments. They typically made their main settlements in the mountains close to common trade routes. The closing cutscene was of an orc-manned catapult being demolished by a huge gnomish cannon. The Angramoria logo expanded out of the smoke until it covered the entire field of view afforded by his VR goggles. After it faded, he stood in a small courtyard where a pretty gnome woman held a clipboard. She looked down at her clipboard, as she looked down at her clipboard, she asked, "So are you nobody?" "Yes, I am." "Excellent. We've been expecting you." "I am not available. Please follow me." Oh my god, they used the name trick and turned the tables. He felt laughter bubbling up and his character mimicked his real-life reactions. "Not available," joined with a chuckle, but still turned and walked off. She led to a small area with practice dummies and an assortment of weapons. "Please select the beginning weapon," she instructed. As he considered his options, he saw almost every type of weapon was available. He planned to use a crossbow initially, since gnomes got +5 to range weapons, and no caster wanted to melee. The update took that away, though, so he hadn't figured what to use. Since he planned to use spells, or more accurately, use other people to do his fighting, he didn't want to carry a lot of weapons, so he chose a short sword and a short sword that looked like it could also be thrown. "Can I throw this like a knife?" Devin asked. "You can throw it like a short sword, but if you really want to use ranged throwing, you probably should select daggers." "Not available," answered. Daggers. He hated daggers. Daggers required dual wielding to be effective and normally relied on lots of special skills. Instead, he decided to use a short sword and a crossbow. "Fine choices. If you would step up to the training dummies, we'll start with your melee weapon. Please swing at the target dummy." "Not available," stated. The training yard was wide and flat, measuring 20 yards at its widest. There were also 2 long ranges, about 6 yards wide, and a good 100 yards deep, with training dummies spaced at routine distances down well-defined corridors. On the left side of the ranges were shorter, and on the right side of the ranges were longer. One training dummy at the far end of the yard stood by an open gate with a sign that read, "Like a Boss" on it. The graphics were decent, but not impressive. Devin knew this was just a precursor, but nothing he'd seen so far raised his expectations. The only thing that still had him excited was the memory of the IVR pod sitting idly in his dining room. He used the short sword and made 3 massive chops at the training dummy, destroying it. Oh yeah, he could get used to that. But Not Available said, "As you can see, your skill with the blade is very poor. Even at a low level, a skilled player could destroy these targets with 1 or 2 swings. You may also notice that your stamina dropped when using the melee weapon. She continued. Short swords use dexterity as their primary statistic to hit, with strength as a secondary statistic. Gnomes get a negative racial adjustment in both attributes. This can be overcome, but strength and dexterity are also hard for gnomes to level, and melee actions require stamina. Gnomes tend to have poor stamina. That's what she said, he mumbled, and was pleased when not available giggled shyly. The stamina bar refills quite rapidly. Now please follow me to the left range and use your crossbow to shoot the target. Pulling out the crossbow, he shot the target and hit it right in the gut. Not available again provided feedback. Crossbows are one of the simplest and most effective range weapons. Their main drawbacks are a lack of range when using low draw weapons, and the time it takes to reload. High draw weapons have better range and penetration, but take even longer to load. Crossbows use dexterity to improve the chance to hit and strength to reduce the time to reload. Because you can damage your own allies if they pass through your spell. Most damage spells do not differentiate between friend and foe if they are channeled or affect. Fire beats paper. He thought sunburn was a pretty lame name for a spell, but he also had to remember it was a first level. It would probably take a few levels to warrant freaking lasers and the sharks to shoot them from. Using his tanning salon attack caused the mana bar to drop slightly, but not significantly, and it recovered fairly quickly. Not available resumed her instructions. Your other light spell is a quick heal known as Minor Heal. It will restore 10 to 15 health to your target. Remember, light spells will damage inherently dark monsters. While humans can act as light or dark minions, players will always respond to spells as though they are neutral until very high levels. Then the game may decide to change the actual attunement of the player. Now, target me and cast your healing spell. You can cast it selectively by using the entire name, or you can cast your most powerful heal by using the heal keyword. Targeting keywords you can use are target friendly, target enemy, target identify, and analyze. You can find an entire list of keyword commands in the system interface under the heading Keyword Command. Devon focused on her, said target, then Minor Heal. When he said target, a small avatar of not available appeared in the upper left of his vision display, showing her health and mana. She didn't show any damage, but that didn't seem to affect the ability to heal her. A soft yellow glow surrounded her as the spell took effect. Congratulations, you have used all your base combat skills. As your skill level in controlling them increases, they will slowly become more effective. Other spells will also become available. Do you have any questions at this time? No, not so far. No, so far this all seems pretty familiar. Well, that's good, but I think you will find that when using the pod, the level of immersion will be much greater than what you have experienced in the past. If you look at your interface, you will see that you have a number of upgrade points, or UPs. She pronounced it as UPs rather than ups. UP? Devon asked. No, I am an NPC, but I suspect UP. Very funny, but since it allows for such an obvious pun, couldn't you have come up with something better? Said Devon. Really? The UP joke is already being applied to merchandise, and we plan to release player-created content that will go viral about it. This is one of the aspects of the game that marketing thinks can be used to propel interest through the social meme network. You can already buy your very own UP t-shirt and coffee mug since you're a member of the alpha testing family, but you can't share what I just told you without violating your NDA. As an NPC, you don't seem to roleplay much, noted Devon. Each trainee is given a trainer with one of many different personality traits, based on the user being trained. The one selected for you has no RP aspects. I have been programmed to respond as though I have complete knowledge of the outside world. In other words, they figured you don't want a cagey, unprepared role-playing trainer, so you didn't get one. If you would prefer, you can restart the training and select a different trainer type in the character selection screen. It's the little face icon on the bottom right. I saw that, but it was kind of innocuous. Can you say Easter egg? Easter egg. Devon groaned, even though he found the logic impeccable, because training scenarios in most games drove him crazy. Pick up this stick and move it over there. Woot, you have completed a quest. The training for Angra Moria was much better so far, so he guessed they had chosen wisely. He said, open character screen, to bring up all possible skills and attributes. He noticed that all the skills started at least at 5, but those in his chosen skill trees and sub-skill trees started higher, as did all of the general skills. Focusing on what he thought was most important, he reviewed his base critical skills and attributes. Fair warning, this is going to come up a lot. Nobody. Gnome. Level 1. Mercantile. Okay, so that goes off the screen. So I'm just going to skip this because, yeah, raisins. That did not translate well to ebook. 15,000 UP seemed like a really nice jump, but there was no way to know how far it would go. So he started with attributes and raised them, but immediately found that with strength being orange, it could only raise by 4. He raised all of his stats to their max. Then he moved to all of the items in his primary and started raising them. When he did this, he confirmed that the UP didn't go down 1 for each one raised, and some cost more than others. Raising all of his attributes only cost around 150 UP. He'd have plenty, but he wasn't sure how many more UP he got each level. How many UP do I get each level, and how is the cost to raise a stat calculated? He asked. Nobody. Not available. The amount of UP changes as you level up, but I can't give you details. The cost per skill points raised is based on an extremely complicated equation that takes into account the current skill level plus the affinity for the base stats, etc. She continued to explain the system. For your primary and secondary skill trees, all items in your chosen sub-skills are dark green to level. All sub-skills not chosen are light green. For the other trees, all sub-skills are light red, and newly revealed skills will be dark red. The general skill tree raises levels based on racial affinity. It's also important to remember that your abilities increase your base skills by adding 60% of the primary supporting attribute and 40% of the secondary attribute. Some later skills also require proficiency in general skills as well to be able to increase or use revealed skills. Is all of that clear? Analyzing what she had told him, it was easy to see that attributes were the first and foremost skills to level, even before his primary skills, as they would add at a base level between 9 to 14 skill points to many different stats. Add 4 to 6 extra, and you boosted those additions to 13 to 20. Devon decided to first max out his attributes, then move to healing to max out all of the light, nature, and special skills, but didn't put anything into dark. Mercantile got boosted across the board, as did all of the general skills. He still had a lot of UPs to play with, so he gave himself some offensive capability. He increased one hand and edge skills, plus ranged and crossbow, and finally all of the dodge skills. This used about two-thirds of his available UPs, and he figured he would save some. Just as a test, he started leveling the rest of his heal skills, and then magic, but had barely put anything into magic skills when he ran out of UPs. Removing the extras, he realized a player couldn't be a jack of all trades, but could be a master of many, and even boost some hard-to-level skills. UP didn't seem to be a problem at all. Not available commented on his choices. Good, I see you saved some. As more sub-skills are revealed, you will have to specialize more and more. Remember, you get UP resets. Currently, you have 2, and for every 25 levels you earn another, so you can reallocate UP points later if you find you haven't done a good job. He'd totally forgotten about sub-skills, but that made a lot of sense. When he was done, he looked at his stats again and was satisfied. With racial and stat bonuses, his basic stats were, and then the table of skills and whatnot, which, again, is cut off in some places. All the sub-skills were close to or the same as the main skills. Devin returned to the melee dummy to test his skills. This time, he severely damaged it with his first sword strike and smashed it to kindling with a second. His stamina dropped, but not nearly as much as the first time. Going to the range dummy, he struck it dead center with the crossbow bolt, destroying it with one hit, then turned his death's sunburn on another and had it pleading for SPF 30 in about half the time it took before. He was ready to head out and smite any scarecrow that might be terrorizing local farm birds. Not available spoke again. This ends your training. There are a number of low-level hunting grounds just through the gate. Feel free to practice. You can save these stats for Go Live, or you can go through the setup and tutorial again, but no levels you earn before the alpha testing starts will be saved. Only initial skill increases. Also, no experience will be saved. Devin had played enough games that he didn't feel he needed to continue, but he did want to see what the trade skills were like. He decided to kill some mobs and try to buy basic tools. After loading his crossbow and making sure that his finger was ready, he went through the gate. The training area looked like a park. A low wall ran about 500 yards away before it turned 90 degrees to create a wide corridor. He couldn't see the end of the corridor as he evaluated the training area. Numerous trees and low hills dotted the field, but none of them would impede movement, and very little would hamper line of sight if someone stood atop one of the hills. The lighting was pleasantly dappled sunlight, which cast a few shadows, but they weren't too strong to give cover to hidden mobs. Overall, it was a fairly typical starting zone without apparent danger, but a lot of available targets. The graphics were still normal VR level graphics, nothing outstanding. Hey, Aderna. Yeah, I'm doing okay. Hope you're doing well. Nothing outstanding. From where Devin stood, he could see a way over or out of the current he couldn't see a way over or out of the current training zone, but he also couldn't see the far side down the corridor. He was sure that there he would find a gate or a passageway out to the general low-level zone provided by most games. Really, Noel? Really? Try that again. Come on. Give the shout out. That's better, Noel.
Shark emotes.
Baby shark doo 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 doo, baby shark doo 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 doo, baby shark doo 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 doo, baby shark. Alright. The first animal he saw was a small rodent-looking creature. He stared at it for a while. Nothing happened except that the rodent walked back and forth in a very predictable pattern. Devin decided to discover more about the creature. He concentrated on it and said, "Identify." A prompt appeared which read, "Squirrel," but nothing else. He tried the command, "Analyze," and a little nameplate with a level indicator and health bar below popped up under the name Squirrel. The rodent was a squirrel level 1, and the health bar was surrounded by a yellow border, which he was pretty sure meant that the creature was neutral to him and wouldn't attack unless he attacked it. Color codes were one of the laws of gaming, almost as immutable as the holy trinity of tank, healer, DPS. Green for friendly, yellow for neutral, red for enemy. Crossbow or finger. If he were going to be a magic user, he should use the finger. Then again, why not start with the crossbow and then use the finger and save the mana? Even thinking the phrase "the finger" made Devin determined to try casting it slightly differently. Still, first thing first, twang! Thunk. Yellow turned to red on the health bar, now 50% less than it was before, and a white 11 floated up above the squirrel to show how much damage he did. He also saw a notification that read, "Crossbow does 11 damage to squirrel." The now maddened squirrel turned to run toward him, as he raised his middle finger and said, "Sunburn." A pencil-thin beam of light drilled into the squirrel. It never even made it to him. Approaching the squirrel, he said, "Loot," and nothing happened. He tried inspect, and a small screen displaying the loot on the squirrel popped up. 5 copper and 1 minor beast meat appeared. Devin said, "Take all," and they disappeared. That made him pause. He'd never checked his own inventory. When he said inventory, another window popped up. Inside were 20 slots and another 5 slots along the bottom, probably bag slots, along with a minor monster meat, 19 bolts, 1 robe, and some food and drink. His wealth was displayed along the bottom, 5 copper. He was pretty sure his riches would allow him to walk into any bar or inn and order an insult with a free ride out the front door. He pulled out his short sword and tried to skin the poor squirrel, but "skinning knife required" prompt came up. I forgot to do a couple things, so I'm going to do an offering. Then I'm going to feed the Jagged. And do an inspire. Okay, and Patron. Boy, my bot's being pretty slow today. Alright, so... Alright, we are almost at the 2-hour mark. Devin's next 4 victims were all squirrels and dropped nearly the same loot. Then he saw another rodent that looked like a squirrel without arms. Could it be? He moved close enough to identify the creature, and sure enough, it was Elite Level 1. Years earlier, he played a game called Anarchy Online, which was a futuristic MMORPG. I actually played Anarchy back in the day. So actually seeing this in the story was amazing for me. They named the low-level mobs in their starter zone Leets to mock the elites who used Leet speak, which meant they spelled with letters and numbers. So 133T
or 1337, or exclamation mark 337, all spelled the same thing. Leet. Nothing was set for spelling, but if you couldn't read it, you were considered a noob, or N00B, etc. The one benefit of LeetSpeak was that it helped him create strong, easy-to-remember passwords for years from pet names and phrases. He could even see some similarities in the UP system versus AO's IP system, although there were many differences as well. He was certain someone on the dev team had been an AO fan. He noticed a lot of head nods to other games as he scanned the area. The banner near the gate was a Horde banner from World of Warcraft. On a sign pointing to the village, the E had the distinctive look of the EVE Online game. Even though he'd never played that game, he could recognize the distinctive lettering. He was now ready to take on his Leet opponent. Crossbow, thunk. Sunburn, death. Leet loot was almost the same as scroll loot. Fortunately, so far, he hadn't seen or heard the other denizen of the AO universe, low-level zones, the utterly annoying roller rat. There were plenty of other RPGs and MMORPGs to borrow mobs from, so he hoped they left those screaming engines of irritation off the menu. After a few minutes of killing low-level mobs, he hit level 2. He checked and saw that he had gained 550 UPs. He didn't distribute them since they wouldn't stay, so he decided to check out the sign. Excuse me. The sign with the arrow. We've got the crabs and we're giving them to you. We've got the crabs and we're giving them to you. We've got the crabs and we're giving them to you. Who's got the crabs? We do, we do. It pointed the way to Hyrule, the missing link. Following the path through the sun-dappled forest, he soon arrived at the gates of a small village. The woods ended a good 100 yards before the village gate, so they would definitely see him coming. He crossed the soft grass plains and entered the village, where he sold off his junk to a vendor. He kept the minor animal meat, but sold off the random tendons, broken teeth, and moldy boots, and added their bounty to his bulging purse. He now had a whopping 2 silver and 45 coppers, or 2s 45c, as his inventory listed it. From the vendor's wares, he bought a skinning knife and cookbook, setting him back a silver. Opening the cookbook gave him knowledge of 3 recipes: roasted minor meat, biscuits, and weak coffee. To make the biscuits, he needed spring water, flour, and a bread pan. Roasted minor meat only needed minor animal meat. Weak coffee needed water and coffee beans. Alright, so we are going to hit the add button again, and we will be back after these brief messages. Once it lets me actually hit the button. So, another 2 minutes of reading. Let's see here. Turning back to the vendor, he bought a baker's kit, pots, pans, and utensils, all filling 1 bag slot, and a few other ingredients he needed. He was out another silver, but he was ready to make dinner. The vendor kindly pointed him to a central fire pit that he could use. He set up and started his biscuits, put water on to boil for coffee, and started roasting the animal meat. Biscuits only took 1 minute to mix and bake in Fantasyland. The coffee and slightly charred meat were ready quickly after that. Ah, his first meal. Right now, eating gave no physical sensation since his VR set didn't include smell and taste receptors. He wondered if the IVR set would, and then recalled Barton mentioning these sensations along with others. Returning to the vendor to sell back his extra food, he realized that charred meat sold much better than raw meat. To his disappointment, food made from items bought from a vendor sold back less than what the ingredients cost. The coffee and biscuits were a net loss. Back at the fire, he cooked the rest of his meat to increase profits and the rest of the biscuits and coffee to minimize losses. The roasted minor meat more than made up for the losses, and he walked off with 3 silver, 28 copper. The wheat coffee reminded him that there was real coffee in the real world, and he decided he'd messed around enough. Time to head back to the real world and dream of IBR and what it might provide. When he logged off, a questionnaire popped up on his screen with some very leading questions. It was lengthy, but not hard to complete. Like many questionnaires, it had a 5-point scale, using 1 for highly disagree to 5 for highly agree. Alright, I should be able to hit the button here in a couple seconds, and then we shall go to ads, and then probably raid. So, we will be back after these brief messages, and then we'll figure out what we're doing from there. Alright, welcome back. So I am currently looking through my list of people I follow and trying to figure out who all to raid. Fluff seems to be live, as does Melly. I've raided Fluff a couple times, but I don't think I've raided Melly in a while. Let's see who else we got. We got Call Me Miss Galaxy. Dreft, Carlos, Recco, Chris Triss, Undead Cowboy, Calypso. Calypso's life. Nice. I hear spooky laughter. Legacy! And fastest! Hello! Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been going for 2 hours already. I was just getting ready to see who all was on. I mean, I could go for another hour. But we're definitely into the story. Yeah, I can continue reading if you would like to stay for a little bit. Are you interested? I can read for another hour. It's fine. I don't mind. We're only 17% through the book. The first question was, the beginning guide fit my personality. He answered 5. The beginning guide made understanding the game easier. Another 5, even though it really didn't, because the game was so familiar to others that any beginning training scenario that wasn't merely tedious deserved a 5. On they went. He erred on the side of generosity with the points, but filled in detailed descriptions. Upon finishing, he was able to view other players' votes, but their names and IDs were hidden and redacted from comments if they referred to themselves. Either that or an awful lot of players named themselves information removed. Some comments were like his, but many were sycophantic, ranting and raving. One player's comments gave a very pertinent, detailed, and in-depth analysis that taught him a lot about the game. The commenter had already progressed to level 10 and was playing a magic fighter combo. The comment covered power progression, damage progression, and even unlocking subskills, but still much of the specific information was redacted, strengthening his conviction that the game was meant to be learned on one's own, and not through reading guides. Well, coffee was calling, and then he needed to do some work to take his mind off the anticipation about the game that was beginning to take over his thoughts. Chapter 5. Go live or go home. A week went by before he was informed that training sessions were over and actual alpha testing was ready to start. Yeah, that's how I always do it. During that time, he leveled a little more, but because he was unable to travel far from the beginning village, it was hard to level past 10 or so. He'd spent a lot of time exploring his trade and skills, and was pleased to find out early that they also gave experience. Gathering granted granted the most overall, partly because he had to find materials in places where mobs often roamed. He'd also gather a while, then fight a while. He never saw another player. He wasn't sure if this was because players were split up so much or because beginning training was considered more personal. He focused on his engineering and was surprised at the helpful items he could make even at a lower level engineer. Although with his specialization, his engineering skill was probably a few levels more advanced than any other player at his level, even if they did put the UP into the skill. Engineering was not a game changer, but it did have its unique and interesting gadgets. First and foremost were traps, bombs, and grenades. Traps could not be set quickly, but did the most damage. For them to activate, a mob needed to set them off, and humanoid mobs seemed smarter than that most of the time. Bombs were like traps, but could be set off remotely, so while the mob inspected the tripwire, he could detonate the bomb. Grenades were just what they sounded like. Their only drawback was that they used the thrown weapon skill, so he could accurately lob a grenade 10 to 20 feet and inaccurately lob it up to 100 feet. The blast area was similar to those of traps and bombs, but the damage was lower. Basically, it gave him some pretty good damage, but took much more planning. But he did notice that grenades especially had a high chance of stunning if they went off anywhere close to an opponent's head. So far, his favorite, though, were the exploding sheep. They were mechanical sheep that wandered around, but if a mob got too close proximity, they would blow up with devastating effect on the mobs close to his level. It was kind of a trap, but with its own internal tripwire, and it took almost no time to set up, although he had to wait almost a minute after setting one up before he could set up another. Over time, he could set out a lot of them, and they stayed in their area until he deactivated them, or they blew up. Plus, it was so dang cute right up until they left a small crater in a dead mob. They had one common component that was hard to make, but he wanted a flock of them roaming around, just for the fun of it. He was pleased that the sensors seemed to be able to differentiate friends from foe, or at least him from others. He could approach them and even deactivate them for later use without setting their proximity fuses off. Someday he would have to convince a teammate to test out whether it really differentiated friend from foe. Just a reminder, we do have a couple of channel point redeems where you can feed the channel pet. You can offer incense to a random god or goddess. There is also the !Inspire for bardic inspiration and !Patron to see which god or goddess protects you. Just fun little stuff for the chat. The flashing bands he could put around his legs or wrists were fun, but probably useless. They stayed lit about 20 minutes and gave him a headache if he tried to use them like a flashlight or torch. They were like a very slow strobe light. He was still working on controlling the frequency. Then there were the gag devices. He could make a reliable whoopee cushion, a very authentic pile of fake vomit, and a stink bomb that could clear a small room, although you didn't want to be anywhere near when it went off because the odor did soak into clothing. He discovered that firsthand when he made them, although he only knew it by the reaction of the people around him. VR didn't have a reliable olfactory input. Alchemy was okay, but most potions only lasted about 10 to 30 seconds. He could only drink one every 3 minutes. He hoped eventually there would be ways to increase that time, but it was possible that the only thing that increased was effect. All he'd been able to make so far were healing mana and stamina potions. The healing potions were weaker than his minor heals, but they didn't take mana. The mana potions were more useful since they returned more mana than 2 heals, so even for healing, they were more efficient. He was very pleased to learn one potion that made a cleansing agent that finally got the smell of the stink bomb out of his clothes. The -5 to charm was getting old. Once he discovered a world market, he planned to sell both and make profits from the trickster and the prey. Ooh, Nisha, nice. And Kilmu, nice. Nice. Nah. Well, if Lukowski shows up, he won't be able to redeem that. Oh well, sucks to be him. Let's see, where was I? He hadn't used the stamina potion because he almost never swung his sword. He stuck with his initial strategy of crossbow, then sunburn, until the target died. As he leveled skills in light and harm, his damage had increased. He could get other skills, but they were pretty expensive. As a test, he made sure to let himself get killed once. The game helped him repeat the test a few more times. At least respawn didn't remove skills or force him to lose experience, but it did drop his damage and stats for a period of time. They slowly rose until he recovered fully at 10 minutes. Luckily, all of his gear and items respawned with him. There weren't any corpse runs or player killers, PK looters, to deal with like Ultima Online. He was surprised that his personal guide never showed up. He anxiously wondered if this was the same hotshot as the player he remembered. He would be even more surprised if Hotshot remembered Rottendok. But throughout the pre-alpha playtime, he didn't interact with anyone other than obviously canned NPCs. It was kind of depressing that the game seemed so similar to other MMORPGs. He made sure to mention that in his reports. The game was good, the leveling system seemed fair, and the skill trees were wonderful if limited, but aside from that, it was still pretty standard VR MMORPG. He hadn't been playing his 20 hours, 20 days during that stage, but he suspected that requirement didn't kick in until the real alpha testing started. No, Gaia Online was never an MMO. It is a chat and forum site that uses anime-like avatars, like the one I'm using for my PNG. And actually, let's switch over to book, because book. The suit's nice, but I like the book. He woke up on the day of the true alpha testing that was supposed to start, eager to jump into the world of Ankh-Moria. The first thing he noticed was that his computer had a countdown timer, which currently read 34 minutes until launch. He ordered up a quick breakfast, lovingly drank his coffee, and was just getting ready to get into the pod when his doorbell rang. Crap! Who could it be? Why did they have to come now? I'm still on Gaia, as you can tell by my avatar. He buzzed the door in his wheelchair and opened. He buzzed to the door in his wheelchair and opened, ready to confront whoever it was that was intruding on his long-awaited moment of entering alpha testing. He was struck aback to find that Virgil from Vital Reality stood on his porch. I know you're anxious to get going in the game. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm here to offer to help you get into the pod and set up. You're welcome to refuse this offer. I know the instructions come with the pod, and I'm sure you've read them, but it can still be challenging the first few times. You've been in the pods? Devin asked, a bit jealous. Oh yes, everyone has learned how to get in and set up. It's part of our training so that we can help players out, Virgil quickly said. And Vital Realities is sending someone to all of the alpha testers? Virgil paled a bit and looked down to the left. No, only the ones they deemed challenged when it comes to getting into the pod. Devin felt the heat rise on his neck. He knew his condition. He lived with it. But he had worked hard to not be a victim of it. Then his engineering rationality overcame pride. He realized he'd been dreading getting set up and in the pod for days. He knew he could do it, and had the adaptive equipment in place, but didn't know if the process would take minutes or hours, and didn't know how tiring it might be. I think I'll accept your offer, Devon said, trying not to show his relief. Great, get into your skivvies or your birthday suit. My what? You did read the manual, didn't you? Oh, right. It did mention something about being naked. It's highly recommended you enter the pod either naked or just in underwear, and I have to warn you, underwear gets in the way of the waste system if you plan to stay in there for an extended period of time. Crap, Devon groaned. And P, we handle both ends. Devon gave Virgil a dirty look, then started laughing. You don't recommend skivvies? Virgil raised one eyebrow. No, I recommend naked. Seriously, I haven't tried the actual functioning for an extended period of time, but I've heard developers talk. It's better to go in naked and hooked up that way, or hooked up than wake up and find your real body had an accident while your virtual self was unaware it even needed. Virgil chuckled and continued. More than one of the developers earned the Poop on the Job award, and one guy earned the title Golden Boy, and not because he did such a good job. The IVR pod seems to relax the body a lot, and that leads to accidents. Devon wasn't embarrassed by his body. When you visited as many hospitals as he had and been poked, prodded, and tested by just as many doctors and nurses, you got numb to being in unflattering situations. Full Monty it is, then. Does it hurt when the tubes are inserted? Virgil looked uncertain. I found it a bit uncomfortable, but I wasn't in-game. The developers say you never feel it because the pod waits until your mind is in-game before hooking up the plumbing. It removes the tubes before you come out. Virgil gave a thoughtful look and continued. One mentioned he had a vague feeling of being violated, but most just brushed it off. I recommend draping a towel over yourself for privacy. When you get in, I'll turn away and you can drop it on the floor before closing the pod. If you look, you'll notice that Vital Reality is written on the cover in strategic locations for men and women. Devon wheeled to his room where he disrobed, covered his lap with a towel, and wheeled back to the pod. Virgil was waiting with the pod open and a hairdryer in his hand at full blast. What's the hairdryer for? Virgil smirked. A little lesson you learn when you have a sadistic trainer. Our trainer made sure the warehouse we were training in was kept cold at night before training. The pod, while top quality, has a supple plastic lining. It can be like dropping your bare butt, actually your entire backside, on an ice block. A couple of minutes with a hairdryer really takes the gas factor away. Charlie was the smart one. He always brought an electric blanket, showed up half an hour early, and had the toastiest pod there. I'd still be upset at that sadistic jerk if we hadn't thrown him in an ice bath after training just to even the score. I heard his next classes covered training on warming up the pod. After the seat was comfortably warmed, Virgil helped him into the pod. The towel didn't stay in place, but Devon just dealt with the embarrassment, the same way he did in the hospital. He ignored it and was glad Virgil did as well. With adjustments, he was situated and comfortable. Finally, Virgil closed the pod lid with a parting, I'll just see myself out. The lid hummed shut and sealed. The head sensors came up and a pair of dark glasses covered his eyes. Blinded by the glasses, his other senses were on high alert. A CPAP-type mask covered his nose and mouth. Air started to be forced gently into his lungs. At first it felt odd to have air forced on inhale and have to exert slightly on exhale, but either the machine or his body quickly adapted, and he soon forgot about it. The plastic still felt cold even after being warmed up, but wasn't too uncomfortable. He waited for the sensors to wrap around his legs and arms, but it never happened. Possibly, he thought, it would after he was in game. Without any further warning, a small light came on, and he was looking down a long dark corridor toward a backlit doorway. In front of him was his gnomish guide, not available, highlighted by the light streaming in from the doorway. Welcome to the real alpha test, she said. We have a minute or two while the IVR pod completes all the connections. Devon asked, Does the supple plastic seal around my body produce sensations? He hadn't been able to discover anything more online about the pods, or how they worked,
and the plastic didn't seem built to transmit feedback. No, the IVR pods are a slight life support module with a sophisticated mental interface. Feedback is fed directly to the brain download, not to the nerve endings. The light in the door turned faintly green, and not available turned and walked down the corridor. Follow me, please. Devon took a tentative step and almost fell over. He was walking. Not just he was having forced feedback to try to simulate walking, but he was walking. He barely remembered ever walking. He took another step, and another, and soon he tried hopping and jumping. He wanted to shout, but found he was crying. Tears rolled unhindered down his face as he slowly walked to catch up to not available. If all the game gave him was walking down a corridor toward a light with a girl, available or not, he would still be happy. Soon his slow walk increased to a fast walk, then a jog, and finally a sprint. He passed not available at a full-on run and sprinted from the lit doorway like it was the final tape in the Olympics. He might never have stopped, but his stamina dropped quickly, and the doorway led into a small room with no obvious exit. He slowed and stopped, and bent over to gasp and regain his breath as Not Available caught up without changing her speed or expression. Did you have fun? Did I have fun? Oh boy, was that fun! It was exhilarating and freeing, Devon exclaimed. Again he felt tears of happiness flow down his face as laughter and a cheer rose unbidden to his lips. Woohoo! I can walk! You know that you really can't. When you return to real life, the IVR pod has not done anything to change your condition. Not Available replied with no emotion. The statement could have hit him like a wet blanket, but it didn't. I know that, Devon began, but in every VR game I've played, the walking and force sensation has always seemed off. It never fooled me into feeling like I could walk in game or out. This technology, this IVR, makes me feel like I am walking, running, laughing. Oh my god, I am in the Matrix, and you know what? Ignorance is bliss. Slap my thigh and call me Coppertop. I am happy to serve the machines. Not Available just stared at him as she walked past. This is the entrance to the game. It will let you out into a similar training zone as you experienced before. Do you want to go through the formal training again? No. He wanted to get out and run around the new IVR world, maybe even swim. Would you like a rundown of controls available or just the basics? She asked flatly. Just the basics. He was more than eager to get on with it. If you stand still and look to your upper left, you will get your character menu. If you look to the upper right, you will get the system menu. Use the system menu to change the layout of your menus, create macros, or access the help menu. Use the character menu to update skills and allocate UP points. The character screen is also where you can access your inventory. Reaching into a bag can either open a specific bag or access your inventory as well, depending on how immersive you want to get. Okay, he replied. Do you want to change any settings you made when you went through training? No. Not Available walked to an empty wall and gestured toward it. Welcome to Angramoria. The wall dissolved, and he stood at the crest of a hill overlooking heaven. The training area was to the left, with the weapons and target dummies, but it didn't go into a little garden like it did in the training. Instead, he saw a mountain valley covered in conifers and brush. A small lake rested a short distance away. The hills rose to mountains on the right and dropped off to verdant valleys with rolling hills in front and to the left. The training area sat on a promontory overlooking the valley. He opened his character menu and found the initial point distributions were still done. Turning to pick up the crossbow and strapping a short sword to his waist, he walked out of the gate to the waiting squirrels and leets. This time the sensations were totally different. He could caress the crossbow. Looking through its sights was like looking down the stock of a real wooden metal weapon, not a rendered skin on a generated framework. The fletching was delicate and soft to the touch. The bolt head was cold and pointed, but not overly sharp. He felt the pull of the sword belt around his waist and wind rustling through his hair. It was especially chilly where it blew over his bald pate. If he had known how realistic the hair would be, he would have chosen a full head of hair. But he had selected his favorite look for a gnome and would live with it, at least until beta testing started. He noticed that his peripheral vision was much better. Even top-notch VR headsets had a limited amount of peripheral vision, but now it felt like his angle of vision was the same or even better than IRL. A short distance ahead, a young gnome stood by a vending cart. "Want anything, sir?" "Shortly. I don't have any money yet," Devin replied. "Are you sure?" Come to think of it, he wasn't sure. He hadn't checked his inventory, so he pulled it up. Inside was food, water, as well as a skinning knife, pick, and a woodsman's axe. He also had 1 silver. He turned to the younger gnome to inspect his wares, but he was only selling cheap armor, which was still more than a silver, health, mana, or stamina potions for 1 silver each, and a cookbook, cook kit, and basic ingredients. Since the cookbook and cook kit were both 1 silver, there wasn't anything to purchase yet. Devin looked up at the other gnome. "I have my skinning knife, and I will be back shortly. Can I chop the trees?" "That is frowned upon. This is the governor's forest. You can chop up or use any dead trees or low-hanging limbs, but if you get caught chopping down a healthy tree, you can be severely fined or even thrown in prison." "Good to know. Don't cross the streams. It would be bad," Devin said. "No, you can cross the streams and even swim, drink, or fish in them. Just don't chop down the trees." "Gotcha." Devin turned to leave, realizing that modern references were not going to be understood by much of the population. Unfortunately, he was pretty sure he wasn't going to be able to stop using them. As a fan of old movies and video games, he liked using some of the best lines from the past classics, and even more from the past not-so-classics. Of course, a lot of the favorites were also driven by forums where the movies and games were discussed. His claim to fame was his fascination with an old short-lived show called The Tick, and his love of gangster and rom-coms, as they had been referred to. The whole forum would groan when he brought up You've Got Mail or Skyrim. He was almost looking forward to getting an arrow to the knee. Heading out onto the hillside, he noticed that the trees in the valley clumped together in small groves with lots of open glades between them. While the majority were conifers, there were quite a few deciduous trees as well. One grove was almost entirely white-bark trees like birches or aspen. He loaded his crossbow as he continued to scan the beautiful countryside. On the far side of the valley, almost to the lake and sitting right next to a small, meandering stream, he could barely make out what looked like a village. It had low walls and some fields with various crops growing around the outside. He hesitated for a few moments, then kept walking. Devin expected winter would be cold based on the steep peaks and the houses had, but right now the sun was warm and the breeze was cooling. He didn't know the time of year, but he would bet it was midsummer since the snow on the peaks had receded and remained only at the highest altitudes. He wasn't in any rush to start killing, so he ambled along, marveling at the feeling of ground beneath his feet, and how uncomfortable rocks could be, even through the thin leather shoes he was sporting. There was a small outcropping of boulders ahead, and he couldn't help climbing on them. He wasn't sure what he expected, but the boulders had a thin covering of yellow and green lichens, and were easy to maintain a foothold on, even at fairly steep angles. It made for fun jumping and climbing. Soon, though, it was time to get busy, so he scanned the ground around the boulders for targets. He spotted his first victim, a big juicy squirrel, and he leveled his crossbow. Twang, thunk, point, sunburn. This time, rather than saying sunburn, he had thought it, and the squirrel expired with a high-pitched squeal. It was much more realistic and disconcerting than it had been during the VR training sessions. The squirrel looked real. When he stopped to loot it, the loot box did not pop up. He reached down, and there was nothing but a dead squirrel with soft fur and a bloody grimace. He pulled out his knife and proceeded to skin it, gut it, and quarter it for meat. This gave him one small thin leather uncured, one minor monster meat, but no money. Grimacing, he opened the stomach, and 5 copper fell out. If he ever got rich, he would stop opening stomachs for loot. The smell was horrendous, and the coppers were slightly corroded and very disgusting. Still, once he put them in the bag, they added to his total. As a test, he pulled a copper out of the bag, and it was clean and shiny. Talk about laundering money. Crimson! For the next hour or so, he stalked the park and collected a lot of rodent pelts, monster meat, and some money. When he leveled up, instead of a sound, he felt a tingling radiate out from his chest that filled him with a feeling of warmth and confidence. And he just knew what it meant. He eagerly distributed his points, raising his attributes and main stats by the max. He also noticed he got 550 UP points for level 2. Once again, I'm not going to read the grid because it cuts off and it's a lot of information. The attribute additions were absolutely amazing. He already saw that his weapons were going to drop far behind his other stats, including his light harm, so he was pretty sure he'd do a reset soon and retrieve those points and put them in sub-skills, where they would be useful. For now, he still had the extras since he'd already decided to specialize in his main abilities. Holy wall of text. He was starting his second round of squirrel killing when the sound of explosion came from across the park, followed by another and another. It sounded like a Roman candle, a really big Roman candle. He started running toward the sound, and soon saw another gnome in a robe, running with a sword at his side. As he watched the newcomer, they both stopped, and the newcomer pointed a finger at a squirrel and said, "Fiery missile!" A small blob of fire leapt from the gnome's fingertip and struck the squirrel with a small explosion, flipping the squirrel end over end. It didn't even have time to cry out. Turning to him, the gnome yelled, "That's freaking awesome! It was kind of fun in training, but the real thing is amazing. Fiery missile!" He yelled again, and another squirrel was incinerated. Looking back, Devon saw a path of dead squirrels and leets behind them. So that was the difference between fire magic and light magic. Light wasn't just good versus evil, but also described its damage versus a real damage class. Devon analyzed the mage and saw he was level 1 and named Ronson, like the lighter. He couldn't get any information about his skill selection, although magic, attack, fire was a good guess. "What are your primary and secondary?" Ronson asked. "I'm magic with attack and defense, specializing in fire and frost and healing with light, but I don't really worry about light damage because why, right? I'm basically a self-healing, damage-dealing badass. You?" "I'm mercantile with engineering and trades, and healer with light specialization," Devon stated. "No, seriously. Seriously, I like crafting." "How do you kill anything?" Ronson asked incredulously. "I shoot with a crossbow, then burn them down with light damage." "Sunburn?" "Yeah," Devon said. "But that's a weak-ass spell. It takes like 5 to 10 seconds to burn down one of those minor mobs, where my lowest level fire damage spell is way overkill for almost the same mana cost," Ronson pointed out. "My lowest fire damage spell is practically instant cast, well, half a second with a 1 second recharge. I plan to focus on teamwork and healing,
Devon said dispassionately. True, but I can be just as good a healer as you and bring a cannon to the table where you bring sandwiches? Ronson clearly had a bit of an ego. Hey, I can use alchemy, engineering, and cooking to directly aid parties, Devon pointed out. True, there's always a lack of healers. I don't want to advertise as a healer, though. I want to be a DPS king. Ronson stopped to shout, Fiery missile! And sent another leet flipping through the air. Woot! Level 2! In less than 10 minutes, Ronson reached what it took Devon an hour to achieve. Are you going to loot those? Devon asked. Help yourself. Piddling amount you get off these guys isn't worth stopping for. Fiery missile! And another one bites the dust. Later, nobody. Love the name, by the way. Fiery missile! Devon turned to backtrack along Ronson's path, where he started skinning, quartering, and looting the bodies. He received a little experience each time he got a usable skin, and usually some meat, although Ronson's critical hits did ruin some pelts. By the time Devon was back to the vendor, he figured it was a good time to sell off the junk.
Want to buy anything?
The vendor queried, in exactly the same tone and manner as he had the first time. Yes, I do. A trade window opened, and after selling off the ruined pelts, broken teeth, and other vendor fodder, he bought cooking utensils and cooking supplies. Devon walked away quite a bit richer than he had during his first trip through Noobsville. Of course, he had looted almost triple the number of mods he would have on his own, due to Ronson's gleeful blasting of everything in sight. Gathering up wood, Devon started a fire by the stream and went for water. When he returned, he hung the water-filled pot over the flame and opened the cookbook to learn the recipes. He put the meat on the fire, baked a batch of biscuits, and prepared the weak coffee beans while waiting for the water to boil. He remembered the promise that the coffee was the best he'd ever tasted and was eager to try it. He only bought enough ingredients for one batch of biscuits so he could taste them himself since they sold so poorly. Soon the water was boiling, and the biscuits were cooking in a Dutch oven. Devon added the grounds to the coffee, waited, and poured cold water in the top to force the grounds to the bottom. He inhaled the rich coffee aroma. He poured himself a cup of coffee, expecting a dark black or even harsh cup, but instead got a mouthful of weak tea-like coffee that had all the flavor depth of a slip and slide. It was quite possibly the worst coffee he had ever tasted. If the coffee was always this bad, he might even resort to using sugar and milk just to endure it, to be able to choke it down. The roasted meat wasn't too bad, although it was burnt on the outside and a bit raw on the inside. It could really use some salt and steak sauce. Actually, Devon realized, with salt and steak sauce, he wouldn't need the meat. And finally, the biscuits. Biscuits was a generous term for a clump of concrete that tasted of flour and baking soda, and he hadn't even used baking soda. Picking up the leftovers, he went to sell the roasted meat to the vendor, but even the influx of extra gold couldn't fully put him from his bad coffee slump. He grumpily decided to walk to the village that had been outside the park the last time. Of course, during training, he hadn't been in a mountain valley, so the village might be very different. He was just a short way past the pond when he came across an ant trail of more carcasses left by Ronson. Devon slowly continued, stopping to loot, skin, and even attack squirrels and leets as they wandered past. A glint of something a short distance away caught his eye. When he moved on to investigate it, he found a copper mine. He worked the mine for an hour or so and dug out 20 pieces of copper before the mine petered out. How many copper bars that would make, he wasn't sure, but it was still a good start. So far, nothing more dangerous than a level 2 leet had shown itself, so like most starting areas, he considered himself fairly safe. His methods had kept him from being hit, so he still wasn't sure how they handled the sensation of pain in the game. Devon was still ecstatically pleased to find himself walking and running. He even tried skipping, but it felt awkward, and he wasn't good at it.
Instead of smoothly gliding along in the swaying manner, he skip-tripped more than anything else. So, one super positive thing about the game, having legs that worked. One super negative, the worst coffee he'd ever drank. The amazing graphic detail, sensations, and even smells and tastes, so far bad, still added up to a totally awesome overall. Devon's happy reflections disappeared when he heard something rushing behind him. As he spun around, he saw a super squirrel charging him. It had to be the size of a St. Bernard, and it looked pissed. He quickly analyzed it while swinging his crossbow to bear. Rocky, level 2, elite, 180 HP. Holy walnut butter. This thing had more HP than he did, and boy, it was elite. By instinct, Devon shot his crossbow at point-blank range and struck Rocky dead center, but didn't slow him down a bit. Devon's health dropped a little, but not greatly, and then Rocky hit him in the gut and knocked him backward. The crossbow went left, his dignity went right, and his butt went down. 24 damage from the charge, plus 10 more from the landing. He managed to point his finger while prone on the ground and started giving Rocky the suntan of his life. The spell was paused when Devon got up. He pointed again, but Rocky wasn't there. Casting a quick heal restored 12 HP. With his increased intelligence, his minor heal now did 12 to 18, so he hit the low end. He cast another and got 15 more, so his health was down 9, and his mana was down about 20%. He noted that heals cost a lot, and could run him out of mana if he wasn't careful. Looking around, Devon couldn't see the monster squirrel anywhere, until he heard a rush and looked up just in time to see Rocky screaming down on him from 15 feet up. Rocky the flying squirrel. Were they kidding? That last thought was all he had time for before Rocky hit him square in the chest and drove him to the ground. 27 HP were stripped off the top, and Rocky had him pinned. The nice thing, though, was that fingers didn't have to be highly accurate when covered up by their target. Devon was able to channel Sunburn right where the sun didn't shine. Then Rocky bit him. So far, all the damage had been impact damage, and while it hurt, it didn't hurt that much. It did do damage, and he felt bruised, but it didn't hurt badly. But this bite hurt. His adrenaline surge kept him from stopping or being distracted by the pain, but it also didn't stop him crying out. He managed to keep Sunburn going, and saw Rocky's health bar quickly decreasing, but Rocky's gnawing on Devon's arm continued to whittle his health bar down. Dropping the Sunburn, Devon cast another heal, then started channeling again. The 17 points recouped by his heal put him on top of the HP attrition war, but then Rocky seemed to smell his butt burning, and took to the skies again. Devon didn't let up for a bit, but Rocky soon flew out of range. After another quick minor heal, Devon took off in pursuit of Rocky. He couldn't see him anymore, but he knew what direction he went. He was sprinting when he saw how fast his stamina bar was dropping, so he slowed to a jog. That way his stamina stayed pretty stable. Just as he was about to give up his search, Devon felt the air rushing again, but this time he started falling to the ground while turning his body. He wasn't in time to dodge Rocky, but he did keep his hands from being pinned under him. Butt meet ground again. Head miss rock, thank God, and Rocky meets Sunburn. This time Rocky slashed at him with his claws and sank his teeth into his shoulder. Son of a squirrel, that hurt! Devon tried to aim at the right place to roast Rocky's nuts, so he couldn't save them for winter. Whatever part he was attacking certainly gained the St. Squirrel's attention. It let go of his shoulder and started to jump up to fly off again, but with his free hand, Devon grabbed for a leg and got a grip on Rocky's right foot, while his right hand kept up Sunburn. Why hadn't he chosen magic? He was sure a fiery missile or two would have ended this fight instead of only slowly whittling down Rocky's HP. But slow or not, Rocky did succumb and dropped to the ground dead. 2 minor heals later, Devon was ready to loot Rocky,
just hoping Bullwinkle didn't show up. As soon as he had enough mana, he cast another heal. Then he proceeded to skin, gut, and process Rocky. 3 pieces of leather, 2 minor monster meat, 1 average monster meat, 3 silver, woot, and nothing else. Nothing else? This was like beginner's park boss. Devon carefully looked around and saw a huge tree a short distance away. That had to be Rocky's tree. Even though it wasn't much taller than the others around it, its girth was 2 to 3 times that of the trees closest to it. As he neared... Sorry. As he neared, he saw an opening 20 feet up and began to climb. He wasn't sure how much his athletics helped, but it wasn't a difficult climb. By the time Devon reached the limb with the opening, he had enough mana for another minor heal, which almost topped off his HP. Inside the hole, Devon found a lair strewn with tufts of fur, fluffs of soft plant growth, and a floor deep with nuts and nutshells. At the far side of the hollow was an iron-bound chest, the size of a child's toy chest, but much more savagely used. He opened it and found 5 silver, a ring, a wand, and a veritable mound of treasure for his squirrel. Here was something that might help, if only he knew what either did. Could there be cursed items in Angramoria? Probably. Would they put them in the noob zone? Probably not. He slipped the ring on, which seemed to work like an identity spell, because he saw that it gave him +1 intelligence. Thank you, Mr. Wizard. Devon climbed down the tree, hefted the wand, and thought, "Fire!" as he pointed it at his leet. A small dagger of ice shot across the space, impaled the leet, and killed it instantly. Oh my god, that was so cool. Again, using the item allowed him to understand it. It also bound it to him, so he wasn't sure he could sell it. A wand of ice shard. Shoot an ice shard at a target to unerringly hit it. Ice shard does 45 to 60 damage. It has a chance to slow its target to 60% of normal movement speed. 5 charges per day. Charges reset at dawn. Oh no, my coffee cup's empty. Sag. While it wouldn't help grind, it would help getting some quick damage on larger targets. He was about ready to head to town again when he noticed a small notification symbol. Mentally selecting it, he found he had leveled again and had a personal message. He was pleased to see it was from Hotshot. When you're in a safe location, reply to the PM, personal message. I will meet for a short visit to answer questions. Not knowing how quickly Rocky might reappear, Devon decided to get some distance before considering himself safe. He waited to reply to the message until he went about a mile from town and found a nice open spot. Seems to be pretty safe now. Join me at your leisure. Hotshot showed up in less than 2 minutes. Oh no? Oh, the coffee, yeah. Hotshot showed up in less than 2 minutes. His avatar was 6 feet tall, and his bulging muscles made him look ready for an action movie. His shiny plate armor glistened in the light, and a sword bigger than Devon rested at his side. Devon couldn't help but ask, "Compensate much?" Hotshot looked down and smiled. "We are encouraged to be flashy and intimidating. My damage reflection could kill you if you tried to attack me. But you would be surprised how many of my compatriots have been attacked in spite of this. At least it lets their charges learn what happens when they go to respawn. After the trouble I had with Rocky the Flying Squirrel, how bored do you get programming these mobs? There was no way I was going to attack you. You killed Rocky. Were you equal or less than his level? Level 2. His death just promoted me to level 3. That's great, Hotshot boomed. Why? His loot wasn't that good. I just won $20. Everyone thought Rocky would send you to respawn for sure. You had to beat him before out-leveling him for me to win. And if he had killed you when you were more than twice his level, I would have lost double. You guys are betting I'm going to get killed? No way. They are betting you're going to get killed. I am betting you'll find a way to overcome the inherent weakness of your choices at low level. Speaking of which, do you have any questions? A couple, Devon said. I may not be able to answer them, but I will if I can. The coffee sucks. Barton assured me it was the best coffee ever, and it just sucks. I mean, I could eat the coffee beans and still not get a good coffee flavor. Not to mention the biscuits could be used with a catapult to assault stone walls. You're cooking level 1 food. This is the food a 5-year-old makes for their mom on Mother's Day. Toast with butter and liverwurst, blackened eggs fried in lard, that kind of stuff. Keep practicing, because practice also increases skills. But even better, it can open sub-skills. That's true for everything. How do I get better recipes, or better spells for that matter? Devon continued. Hotshot gave a thoughtful look. It depends. Regular spells sometimes only become apparent when you reach a certain level. These are standard spells, and everyone with the level, specialization, and skill requirements get them free of charge. Then there are the uncommon skills that can be bought from vendors or found as loot. Finally, there are sub-skills that have to be discovered through practice of the controlling skills. Hotshot continued his lesson. Most skills have a direct sub-skill. Some require 2 or 3, and the most potent sub-skills require 5 or 6 higher skills, often from different skill trees. As you unlock one level of sub-skills, there is often at least one more layer below it. A very few go 3 layers deep below the top skill, and only one tree goes 4 and sometimes 5 layers. Let me guess. Mercantile, Devon stated. With a huge grin, Hotshot nodded. Oh yeah, baby. That's the most misunderstood and underrated skill tree there is. Originally, it was going to be a general skill tree like running in politics, but I convinced them differently. Then they left the entire tree up to me. Any hints? 2. No sub-skills in Mercantile require skills from other trees, but no other tree requires as much general practice across all branches to unlock the best sub-skills as Mercantile. It'll be a moneymaker, and with you being the only primary Mercantile, you stand to be rich. Enjoy it in Alpha, because a few people might wise up by Beta, and certainly by release. Anything else? I have to ask, Devon ventured. Have you always used the name Hotshot, even as a player? You've heard of me, then. I think I've teamed with you. Oh, crap. Hopefully it was recently. No, about 5 years ago or so. Was I an arrogant pain-in-the-butt huntard? Yes, Devon replied. Were you a tank? Tanks hated me, and for good reason. No. DPS? I made DPS look bad, so they had a dim view of me too. Don't get me wrong, I played my hunter to the top of his DPS potential. I just didn't care that it put everyone else in danger. No, not a DPS. Oh shit, you were a healer. Yes, and we had some very interesting words, Devon recalled. That doesn't really narrow down my options to figure out who you are. I got you kicked from a party made up of... Come on. There it is. Your guildies, even when I wasn't one. Rottendock. You were Rottendock? Devon didn't know if this was a good thing or if he had just given his advisor the biggest revenge bat ever. That is my normal healer name, yes. Devon was stunned when Hotshot leapt forward and threw his arms around him. In normal MMORPGs, hugging another guy was kind of awkward. In VR games, it was more than awkward unless they mutually agreed upon. And in IVR, it was downright intrusive and very uncomfortable, probably even for those who swung that way. Dude? Devon said, trying to step back. Let me check my quick access. Okay, so in 3 minutes, I will be able to push the add button. Hotshot excitedly explained, You're the asshole who changed my life, and not just my gaming life. After you got me kicked from the party, I went on a rant in the guild channel. I really thought these guys were my friends, but they laid into me. They told me what an arrogant, self-serving prick I was, and how no one wanted to team with me because I even made easy runs hard. Hotshot still couldn't contain his excitement. Then they kicked me from the guild. When I went guild hunting, I discovered that my reputation preceded me, and no other guilds wanted me. I finally was allowed into one on a trial basis, and had a lot of long talks with the guildmaster. It took a while, but I went from asshole to A1 in a couple of months. I started enjoying the game more, started enjoying my guildmates, and became an officer. I was still really good at DPS, so I trained a lot of the guild members to be better DPS, not just higher DPS ratings. I started to really study DPS. Hotshot's eyes lit up even more. That's when I found out I wasn't just good at processes. I was great. So I changed my major in college and went into gaming design. Hired on with Vital Realities and got lead designer for the Mercantile skill tree after only 3 years working for the company. I am just as much a team player with the company as I became in games, and it all started with you getting me kicked because a good reasonable healer was worth more than a great out of control DPS. He stepped back. I monitored your character after that, and used alts to check on how you were liked and how good you were. You didn't rate enough to be ranked with the top healers, but I never met anyone who had a problem or wouldn't gladly invite you to their team. That was my goal once I got the operation. Operation? Yeah, the one that removed my head from my ass. Hotshot threw back his head and laughed heartily. Devon found himself joining in. So, which merc skills is my fastest way to power? Devon prodded. That would be cheating. I will say that potions and blacksmithing will be the fastest way to riches early on, but enchanting will have great potential, and food, oh man, the food is glorious and can make you rich. Engineering? Lots of fun stuff in engineering. Average money potential. A lot of engineering devices require engineering to use so they don't sell well. But what about power? Cheating. No big spoiler alert here. Can I ask you a question? Sure. What do you think of the game? You said you checked on me. What do you know about me in real life? Alright, we're going to take an ad break, and we will be right back. All right, and we are back. So, we've been going for 3 hours. I require sustenance, so I'm going to call it here. So, we're going to see who's live and do a raid out. Because it's hard to cook and stream at the same time. So let's see who's on. Ba, 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 ba. Zoom in.
But what did you tell him stream it? Your quality is probably.
No, I did not. I figured I'd save that for a surprise. Let's see here. Peaches, joystick. Melly's still alive, though it looks like she might be ending.
No.
Or no, she's. I guess she restarted.
I'm sleeping through Millie.
I don't know if she's still alive or not. I can't really tell what the screen says. Oh, she's on Be Right Back. Okay. I might raid Melly.
That was there. Maybe it's like fluffing like 14.
Recco, Chris Triss,
Mistress is always abducted.
Carlos. Call Me Miss Galaxy, Apple Crumbly. Ragnoth has been streaming for 5 seconds.
Reggie!
Or 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Reggie? I thought you've gotten a chance to read Reggie yet.
I have.
Good.
Let's see.
His sweetheart. Life was treating him correctly.
So how long has Chris been live?
Well, Chris probably all day.
For the past 7 hours. There's also Doggy Dad. So here's the raid messages. We're also going to give him a shout out. DOGGY DAD.
It's D0, by the way. It's not an
Or
O.
exclamation mark. Sorry.
For the raid. It's slash raid, not.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to shout him out. For the love of bacon. So slightly longer than me. So we're gonna go me for this reading. For those who joined me like halfway through, this was in memoriam of the
Did you have fun?
Oh yeah, totally.